I wasn't planning on going back. Not ever. For nearly 10 years, I'd done everything I could to push that forest out of my life. Blocked the number of the guy who was with me that trip, deleted the GPS coordinates, even sold the camera I'd used. I built a life around forgetting. Quiet town, freelance gigs, evenings spent editing wedding photos or shooting grainy black and whites for moody travel magazines. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept me busy enough not to think too hard. Still, the memories never really left. Sometimes at night, I'd wake up sweating, swearing I heard heavy footsteps outside my window, the sound of pine needles crunching slowly, deliberately, beneath something that walked like a man but wasn't. I chalked it up to stress. Or maybe guilt. I'd never talked to anyone about what I saw out there. Not really. Not even to the people who went with me. We all came back different, and none of us ever spoke again. But then came the envelope. It showed up one morning in early October, plain white with no return address. Just sitting there in my mailbox like it had always belonged. The paper inside was yellowing and smelled faintly of damp leaves. There was no signature, no date, no markings, just one line, typed in faded ink. You left something behind. Come back. I stared at it for a long time, standing there in the kitchen in my socks while my coffee went cold. It was the kind of sentence that doesn't feel like a threat, but more like a fact. Something you already know, deep down, but don't want to admit. I didn't throw it away. Instead, I pulled out my old storage drive and scrolled through folders I hadn't opened in years. Deep in one of them, labeled July Trip Final, I found photos from the last time I'd set foot in Black Hollow. It hit me like a punch to the gut. The photos were too familiar. Trees warped in strange angles. A close-up of torn bark shaped almost like claw marks. And then one image I didn't remember taking at all. A blurry shot, slightly off-center, of two glowing orbs in the dark. Eyes. Not an animal's. Too far apart. Too tall. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my chair listening to every creak and whisper the old housemaid. And by morning, I'd made a decision that felt like it had already been made for me. I was going back. I spent the next 2 days preparing, half out of caution, half out of obsession. I charged every battery I owned, bought a new headlamp, replaced my handheld GPS with a newer model, picked up a stack of memory cards and a satellite phone. Not because I thought it would save me, but because if I was going to do this, I needed to document everything. Not just for me, for anyone who might come after. Packing was surreal. I dug out the same pair of boots I wore 10 years ago. The laces were brittle, the soles cracked, still caked with dry mud from that forest. I held them in my hands for a long time before tossing them in the back of the truck. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. What would I even say? Hey, I'm heading back to the place where something with glowing eyes watched me from the trees all night and nearly drove me mad with silence. No, I just left a vague text with my brother, dropped my dog off at a sitter, and hit the road at dawn. The drive took most of the day. Trees gave way to hills, hills gave way to pine, and the closer I got, the quieter the radio seemed to play. When I pulled into the same gas station we'd stopped at 10 years ago, I half expected it to be boarded up. But no, it was still there. Same dusty pumps, same little convenience store with faded deer hunting posters in the window. The clerk behind the counter glanced up as I paid for gas and a thermos of stale coffee. You heading up into Black Hollow? He asked casually, like it was the weather. I paused. Yeah. You heard anything about that place lately? He didn't answer at first, just stared at me. Then he gave the faintest shake of his head. Nothing good, he said, and rang me up. The last stretch of road was narrow and barely paved. The forest on either side seemed to lean inward, like it wanted to pull me off the asphalt and into the trees. My truck's tires kicked up dust as I turned onto the old access trail. The sun was setting by then, the golden light filtering through the pines in thin, smoky shafts. When I finally pulled into the small clearing where we'd camped all those years ago, I killed the engine and sat there for a minute, just breathing. It looked the same bent tree at the edge, same ring of stones half buried in the soil. But the silence, it wasn't natural. No birds, no insects, not even the wind. Just this heavy, pressing stillness, like the air itself was holding its breath. I stepped out of the truck, my boots crunching on the pine needles. The temperature dropped fast. I could feel it in my chest and in my bones. I hadn't even unpacked yet, but something in me already knew. The forest knew I was back, and it was waiting. The sun dipped below the tree line faster than I remembered, like it couldn't get out of the forest fast enough. I set up camp in the same clearing we'd used all those years ago. The fire ring was still there, its stones sunken deeper into the earth. I found remnants of the old firewood pile too, rotted, soft, practically returned to the forest. I gathered what I could and built a new stack, keeping the fire high and hot. Night settled in thick. The pines stood tall around me, silhouettes against a darkening sky, their needles whispering in a breeze I couldn't feel. I sat beside the fire, wrapped in my old canvas jacket, my camera on the ground beside me, just in case. I kept thinking maybe I'd imagine the message. Maybe this was all just nostalgia twisted into paranoia. But that silence, that unnatural stillness I remembered, had returned, and it wasn't in my head. Even the fire seemed quieter than normal, the crackling dull, like the forest was dampening sound itself. That's when I heard it. Crunch. Then another. A slow, deliberate footstep just beyond the firelight. I froze. The air tightened in my lungs. I reached for the flashlight, flicked it on, and swept the beam across the edge of the trees. Nothing. Hello. I called out, voice steadier than I felt. No answer. Then it came again, another crunch, just a few feet away. Not a scurry like a raccoon or deer. This was heavier, measured, almost human. My pulse was pounding now. The camera's weight around my neck felt like a noose. I stood up slowly, gripping the flashlight like a weapon, heart thudding so loud it was all I could hear. And then came the sound I hadn't heard in over a decade, but instantly recognized. That same low, dragging breath. Back then, I'd only caught it once, outside my tent on the third night, when I was too scared to unzip the flap. But now here it was again. Not imagined. Real. Deep. Wet. Like a tree exhaling sap. I swept the light again and caught something. Movement. A shift in the blackness. The beam hit a shape. Tall, motionless. Not tree. Not animal. But gone in an instant, like it had sunk back into the bark itself. I couldn't breathe. My legs were locked in place, like the roots had come up and grabbed my ankles. Show yourself, I whispered without meaning to. I know you're there. But the forest didn't answer. Instead, the footsteps began again, this time behind me. I spun, but there was nothing. Just shadows and cold. Then I realized it wasn't trying to get close. It was circling. Around me. Just like before. The exact same rhythm, the same pacing. Like it remembered me. And it wanted me to remember it, too. I backed up to the fire and stayed there all night, flashlight clutched tight, camera in my lap. I didn't sleep. Not even for a second. And though I never saw it fully, I knew something was watching me from just beyond the trees. It didn't need to show itself. It already had my attention. Just before dawn, the sound stopped. Not slowly, instantly. As if the forest itself hit mute. I waited until the sun broke through the canopy before I dared to move. My limbs ached from tension. My neck was stiff from keeping my head on a swivel. I poured cold coffee from my thermos and forced myself to drink it. Then I looked down. In the dirt near the fire, 4 prints. Each one deep. Too long. Too narrow. Not barefoot. Not boots. Something in between. But worse than the shape was the fact that they led toward me and never away. The morning sun cut through the trees in pale shafts, but it didn't bring warmth. Not really. I sat by the dying embers of the fire, staring at the prints in the soil, my brain spinning in circles. They led right up to where I had sat all night, and vanished. No returning trail. No sign of retreat. Whatever it was, whoever it was, it had come to me, stopped a few feet away, and then what? Disappeared into thin air? The forest around me was wide awake now. Birds calling, squirrels rustling, branches swaying, but it all felt like theater. Like a cheap mask thrown over something ancient and patient beneath the soil. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I packed up my gear, slung the camera around my neck, and walked. Not by compass or trail, just by feeling. My boots crunched along the carpet of needles and moss, deeper into Olympic National Forest, where the trees grow older and thicker and start to lean in close, like they've been holding secrets too long. It wasn't long before I found it. A clearing, small and nearly swallowed by vines and brambles. In the center stood what looked like the bones of a cabin, sagging timbers and collapsed shingles, gray with rot. The sight made my chest tighten. It was exactly as I remembered it from that final trip, a place we'd stumbled on while mapping treefall damage. I hadn't thought much of it then. Just another forgotten hunting shack, half-eaten by time. But now I saw the mark, etched into the wall. A spiral, not carved, but burned, deep and black, pulsing faintly in the morning light. I stepped closer, and something shifted behind me. Not sound, not movement, but a change in the air. A presence. You've returned. The voice came from behind me. Low, cracked, like whined through dead leaves, but it wasn't threatening. I turned slowly, and there he was. At first glance, I thought it was a man. Tall, lean, draped in rough burlap and dried moss. But his skin wasn't skin. It looked like bark, smooth in some places, knotted in others. His face was human, almost, but the eyes gave it away. Too bright, too green. They glowed softly, like moss under moonlight. Who are you? I asked, heart hammering, but not from fear, not exactly. I am known by many names, he said. But the forest calls me Skara. Skara, I whispered, the name strangely familiar, like something from a half-forgotten dream. You came here once before, he said, stepping forward. His movement was soundless, as if the earth itself made way for him. You heard me then, even if you didn't understand. And now you've come back. I got a message, I said, voice hoarse. A sound, a memory. Something told me to return. Skara nodded slowly. The forest remembers you. It reaches out to those who've seen past the surface. And it called you because it's dying. He extended a hand, long fingers like twisted roots, and touched my forehead. It was like lightning in reverse. My knees buckled, and I dropped to the ground as a flood of images poured into me. Clear-cut slopes, streams choked with oil and trash, deer lying dead with plastic in their guts, trees falling, machines roaring, animals running, hunted. Then, in contrast, came the beauty. Hidden groves with golden light trickling through leaves, secret springs where birds nested undisturbed, flowers growing in silence that no one had seen in generations. When I opened my eyes, the cabin was gone. Skara stood in a grove that hadn't been there a second ago, surrounded by trees so old they looked fossilized, their trunks wider than cars. He helped me to my feet. Why me? I asked, breath shaky. You see with more than eyes, he said. You carry a tool that captures truth. I looked down at my camera, still slung across my chest. You want me to take pictures? Yes, Skara said. But not just images. Messages. Memories. Proof. Show them what they're destroying. Make them see. And if they don't, then the forest will show them another way. There was no threat in his voice. Just certainty. I nodded slowly. Okay, I'll do it. I'll show them. Skara stepped back, merging with the trees as if he'd never been separate. The forest will guide you, he said, voice already distant. But beware, its enemies walk among men, and they do not like the light. Then he was gone. Just trees. Just wind. And the faint echo of something ancient slipping back beneath the roots. I didn't leave the forest that day. I couldn't, not after what I'd seen. It was like something inside me had shifted, like I'd crossed a line and there was no going back. The forest didn't feel like a place anymore. It felt like a living thing, awake and watching. And I was a part of it now. I hiked until my legs ached and the sky turned a dull gold through the pine needles. I found a ridge overlooking a sunken grove and set up camp with trembling hands. That night, I reviewed the photos I'd taken, images of ancient trees with scarred bark, of moss glowing faintly in the dusk, of strange symbols etched in stone and root. And they were alive. It's hard to explain, but when I zoomed in, the images pulsed with something, some essence I'd never seen in a photo before. Not a trick of the light, not lens flare. It was awareness, like the forest was using my camera to speak. I spent the next 3 weeks in those woods. I stopped counting days. Time started to bend. Sometimes it felt like I'd been out there for hours. Then I'd realize the sun hadn't moved. Other times, I'd blink and it would be nightfall. I followed no trails, no maps. I let the forest guide me. Skara never reappeared, not in the way he had before. But I felt him. In the way the wind shifted when I took a photo of a dying tree. In the way birds would fall silent just before I reached a new glade. In the way the lens of my camera would fog over when I aimed it at something I wasn't supposed to see. Yet, I captured beauty that made me cry. A misty ravine filled with blue mushrooms glowing like embers. A silver fox curled beside the skull of a long-dead buck. An ancient cedar split open by lightning, with wildflowers blooming in its hollow like an altar. But I also saw the forest's pain. clear-cut stumps that bled black sap, plastic bags tangled in saplings. Rivers turned green with runoff. I followed the sound of chainsaws one morning and found the remains of a campsite. Beer cans, broken branches, an axe left behind like someone ran. There was a message scratched into a fallen tree. Stay out. You don't belong here. I took a picture of it, then burned the rest of their trash in silence. Sometimes at night, I'd hear movement, slow, heavy footsteps circling the edge of my camp. I never saw who or what it was, but the forest didn't feel angry. It felt patient, like it was waiting to see what I would do next. One night, I set up a trail cam on the edge of an old logging road. I left it running for 3 days. When I reviewed the footage, my blood went cold. Frame by frame, something emerged from the trees. 7 feet tall, bark for skin, antlers like twisted roots. It didn't move like an animal. It moved like it knew it was being watched. It walked up to the camera, leaned down, and this is the part that made my hands shake. It placed a single pine cone in front of the lens. Then it vanished into the mist. That was the first time I realized this wasn't just about exposure. It was about communication. The forest wasn't just suffering, it was speaking. And someone had to listen. I started uploading the photos to a private cloud. No captions, just images. Some of them began to circulate quietly, shared in forums, reposted on obscure environmental blogs. People started asking where I'd taken them. I didn't answer. Not yet. Because part of me knew, once this story got out, really out, there'd be consequences. The people destroying these woods wouldn't let the truth spread easily. And the forest had enemies. Real ones. With machines. With money. With motives. I wasn't just documenting anymore. I was stepping into a war. It was a cold morning when I first heard the chainsaws. The sound tore through the silence like an alarm bell. I was deep in the northwest quadrant of Olympic, a part of the forest I hadn't explored before. It was supposed to be off limits to development, protected land. But the noise was unmistakable. Mechanical. Violent. Wrong. Max, my old Nikon, hung around my neck as I hiked toward the sound. Each step felt heavier. The pine needles didn't crunch under my boots like they used to. They were damp, flattened, as if something massive had passed through recently. By the time I reached the clearing, my breath had turned shallow. They were there. 5 men in fluorescent vests, all in their 30s or 40s, hauling trees like they owned the place. A 6th stood by a black truck, barking orders. The forest around them looked butchered, massive Douglas firs laying like corpses, stripped of branches, bleeding sap into the dirt. I stepped into the open, raising my camera. One of the men saw me and shouted. Another grabbed an axe. I kept clicking the shutter. What the hell do you think you're doing? The one by the truck yelled, marching toward me. You can't be here. This land's protected, I said, my voice shaking more from rage than fear. You're not supposed to be cutting here. He stopped a few feet from me. His eyes were cold. Empty. You should turn around, old man. Some places aren't safe for hikers. Behind him, another tree cracked and fell. The thud rattled my bones. That's when I smelled it. That scent, wet bark, sap, and something ancient. It wasn't from the trees. It was him. The ground shifted. A hush fell over the clearing. And then Skara emerged. He didn't walk, he rose. From the tree line came the sound of groaning wood, creaking limbs, as if the forest itself were waking up. Skara stepped into the clearing like a god returning to claim his land. He was taller than I remembered. Bark covered his limbs like armor. Vines curled around his arms and legs, moving like muscles. His antlers stretched wide, like branches silhouetted against the morning light. His eyes glowed faintly, the color of burning moss. The men froze. What the hell? One whispered. Another dropped his chainsaw. Skara raised a hand. The wind surged. The trees bent inward, as if leaning toward the intruders. A gust of pine needles tore through the air, stinging exposed skin like glass. One man screamed, shielding his face. And then came the roar. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was the sound of everything wild and ancient, everything that had lived in these woods for centuries. A sound older than language, older than memory. The loggers broke. They ran, stumbling over roots and tools, shouting to each other not to look back. The man in charge lingered a second too long. Skara stepped toward him. That's when I saw it. Not anger, not vengeance. Mercy. Skara didn't strike. He just stared, and the man dropped to his knees. He sobbed. I don't know why. Maybe the weight of what he'd done finally caught up to him. Maybe the forest showed him what I'd seen. Either way, he didn't run. When they were gone, Scara turned to me. His eyes dimmed, and for a second, I saw the human face again. The one from that first night. Weathered. Wise. Filled with sorrow. You see now, he said, his voice rustling like wine through dry leaves. Why you were chosen. I nodded. I couldn't speak. This forest will not survive in silence, he continued. You must carry the sound. The images. The truth. He stepped back, melting into the shadows like a story returning to the roots. And just like that, he was gone. The clearing fell quiet again, save for the breeze through broken branches and the slow return of birdsong. I stayed there for a long time, the smell of chainsaw oil still clinging to the air, the earth torn and bruised beneath my boots. But I knew what I had to do. The war had begun. The photos made their way online a week later. I didn't post them to my usual blog. I created a new site, anonymous at first, titled Only the Watcher in the Pines. I uploaded the shots of the damaged trees, the discarded chainsaws, the frightened logger caught mid-sprint with terror frozen on his face. I didn't include Scara's image. He wouldn't have wanted that. But I hinted at it. I wrote about the movement in the trees, the roar that shook the birds from the canopy, the sense of something old rising to defend what was left of the forest. And the site blew up. At first it was hikers and forest lovers who found it. People who already believed there was something sacred out there. Then the conspiracy crowd picked it up. Threads on Reddit. Ghost forums. Green Spirit in Olympic. One post read. Nature's Wrath. Captured on camera. By the end of the second week, I got my first interview request. It was a small podcast called Hidden Earth Lines, hosted by a guy named Milo who recorded from his garage in Seattle. His voice cracked with excitement as we spoke, like he couldn't believe he was talking to someone who had seen the forest fight back. I kept it vague, talked about the feeling of being watched, about ancient legends, about how some things are better understood emotionally than scientifically. I didn't say Scara's name. That podcast got picked up by a few bigger ones, and within a month, my inbox was flooded. Offers, interviews, requests for my uncut footage. A producer from a streaming service even emailed, asking if I'd help scout locations for a documentary about forest myths. But with the attention came the doubters. Photoshop. Staged. Old man trying to stay relevant. Ben Carter? The photographer who had a breakdown back in '92? Yeah, sure. Totally legit. The internet has a way of lifting you up and cutting you down in the same breath. More than once I considered pulling everything offline, deleting the site, erasing the photos. But then I'd get an email, quiet, personal, from someone who had seen something too. A park ranger in Oregon who'd found footprints too deep for any bear. A woman from Idaho who said her son woke up screaming from dreams of glowing eyes in the trees before she even saw my story. A researcher in Maine who claimed old native stories spoke of a guardian covered in bark and vines who appeared only during times of great ecological harm. One message just said, "He came to me too. I think we're part of something bigger. Don't stop." I didn't. Instead, I gave a name to the story, The Eyes Beneath the Pines. I started printing my images, not in glossy photo books or gallery prints, but in small batches, on weathered paper with captions written by hand. I mailed them to schools, conservation groups, and anyone who asked. No cost, just a request to share. But not everyone was happy. One night, just past 2 a.m., I got a call from an unlisted number. I picked up without thinking. The voice on the other end was calm. Too calm. You're drawing the wrong kind of attention. I stayed quiet. There are groups, government and otherwise, who've worked hard to keep that forest quiet. You'd be wise to stop now. And then it clicked off. I sat in the dark, the dial tone humming in my ear, and for the first time in weeks, I felt truly afraid again. Not of Scara, not of the forest, of people, the ones who profit from silence. I went outside. The air was cold. Still, my truck sat in the gravel driveway, camera gear in the back. And somewhere, in the woods beyond, I thought I heard the faint creak of a tree shifting, just one. Like a nod, a reminder that I wasn't alone. I lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "I'm not stopping," I whispered to no one. The wind didn't answer, but something rustled in the pine needles. Time passed. Seasons came and went like tides. The trees changed their colors, dropped their leaves, grew them back. The forest lived, with or without me. but I could never fully leave it. I stayed in Washington, not far from the Olympic National Forest. I bought a little cabin near Forks, not the romantic kind folks talk about when they come looking for twilight sunsets, but a damp, moss-covered place with creaky floorboards and a porch that looks out toward the ridgeline where the forest thickens. I liked it because it felt close enough to hear the trees breathe at night. My name started to fade from the online world. The attention died down. The articles stopped coming. The podcasts moved on to aliens and underground cities. New conspiracy theories pushed mine out of the spotlight, and I was okay with that. Let them forget me. But some people didn't. A young woman showed up at my cabin last spring. Backpack over one shoulder, boots caked in mud. She introduced herself as Callie, said she was studying environmental journalism at Oregon State. Her eyes lit up when I opened the door, like she couldn't believe I was real. I read your whole archive, she said. Every word. I think it changed my life. She spent the weekend asking questions, recording our talks, photographing my prints. She didn't ask for proof. She didn't need it. Before she left, she asked one last thing. Do you think it's still out there? I looked at the trees. It never left. After she drove away, I stood on the porch for a long time, watching the way the sunlight hit the moss-covered trunks in the distance. A breeze rolled through, slow and whispering, like an old friend brushing by. Years have taken their toll. I'm in my 60s now. My knees ache on cold mornings. The tremor in my hands makes holding a camera harder. Some days I forget where I set things down. But I still remember that night in the woods. That roar. Those eyes. The way Scara stood, not as a monster, but as a protector. I know my time's running out. I feel it in my bones. And sometimes, when the sky turns that deep gold just before dusk, I hear the forest calling me back. It started as a dream. In the dream, I stand at the edge of the old clearing. The pine trees are taller than I remember, their branches thick like arms crossing in defense. I see the firelight dancing, though I don't remember lighting one. And I feel him, before I see him. Scara. Not angry. Not monstrous. Just there. Waiting. As if he's been waiting a long time. Sometimes I wake from the dream with tears on my face and pine needles stuck to my socks, even though the cabin doors are locked. I think I'm being invited. Not threatened. Invited. Back. Last week, I packed a small bag. Just my camera, a notebook, some batteries, and an old walking stick I carved years ago. I left a note on the table in case someone finds it. If I don't return, don't look for me. Just listen to the trees. Tonight, I'll head out again. One last trip into the woods. Not to expose, not to prove anything, but to understand. To see what lies beyond the reach of flashlights and fear. To answer the call that's echoed through the pines since the day I ran. If you're reading this, then maybe you've heard it too. The low hum in the distance. The creak of an old bough in the windless dark. The feeling that something is watching, not with hunger, but with memory. That's the forest. It remembers you. And one day, when the time is right, it might call you home too. Just promise me one thing. If you go, bring respect. Bring silence. And don't forget to look up. Because the eyes beneath the pines, they never close. My name's Edward Taylor. Ed to everyone who knows me. And what I'm about to tell you started with something simple. I needed a break. Nothing dramatic. No big life crisis. Just the quiet realization one morning in late September 1987 that I was sick to death of fluorescent lights and the smell of burnt coffee. I'd been grinding it out for over 20 years at a freight distribution center in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. You know the kind. Warehouse the size of a football field, shift whistles, cold winters and steel-toe boots, and summers so hot the concrete sweats. It wasn't a bad life, but it wore you down in ways you didn't notice until they piled up. Paper cuts, back aches, managers who talked in circles, and the same damn turkey sandwich for lunch every day. I started waking up tired. That kind of tired doesn't go away with coffee. So I took 2 weeks off. Unpaid. Didn't care. My boss raised an eyebrow, but I told him the truth. I was either going to take a vacation or quit and move to Montana. He laughed. I didn't. The first thing I did was get my hands on a second-hand RV. She was an old 1976 Dodge Travco. Beige, boxy, and built like a tank. She'd seen better days. The fridge made a humming sound like a dying bee, and the water pump wheezed like a chain smoker, but she was mine. I named her Old June, after my mother. My only companion for the trip was Roscoe, my 10-year-old mutt. I'd found him at a gas station years ago, shivering in the rain behind the dumpster. He was big, with a thick, patchy coat and floppy ears that always made him look mildly concerned. He was the kind of dog that followed you from room to room, just to be nearby. Never barked unless he had to. Never needed much. Just food, a spot to lay down, and your presence. The older I got, the more I understood him. I picked Allegheny National Forest for the simple reason that it was vast, beautiful, and not too far from Harrisburg. A friend of mine, Jim Holloway, had hunted up there for decades. He told me about this clearing not far from the Clarion River, a quiet place, tucked off an old service road, surrounded by red oaks and white pines. He said you could go 3 days without seeing another human being. That's all I needed to hear. We left just after sunrise, Roscoe in the passenger seat with his chin resting on the dashboard like a co-pilot who didn't care about maps. The drive took about 5 hours. Highway turned to country road, then gravel, then dirt. The forest grew thicker with every mile, the air cooler, damper. Leaves had already started to turn, reds, oranges, and burnt yellows mixing in with the pines. It felt like entering a world that didn't care about clocks or deadlines. When we reached the clearing, I knew immediately I'd made the right choice. It was perfect, tucked into a bend in the river, with a small rise on one side and thick trees all around. It felt like a place forgotten by time. There was just enough open sky for the sunlight to warm the ground, and the river's quiet murmur was steady, constant, like breathing. I parked old June under a tall pine and leveled her out with a few bricks and some good guesses. Roscoe leapt out the moment the door opened, nose to the ground, tail wagging, sniffing every rock and twig like he was filing a report. I spent that first evening setting up a little camp, a fire ring made from smooth stones, a pair of folding chairs, a rack for drying my socks, and a cooler half full of beer and smoked sausage. Dinner was simple. Fried trout I'd picked up from a roadside stand, a few potatoes wrapped in foil, and a splash of bourbon to wash it all down. Roscoe got a pork bone from the butcher, and he gnawed it like it was the best thing he'd ever tasted. By the time the fire had settled into glowing embers, the stars were out in full. No light pollution out there. Just the kind of sky that reminds you how small you are. I sat back with my drink, Roscoe stretched out at my feet, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to be anywhere else. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt like medicine. Mornings were for fishing or hiking, depending on the mood. The Clarion was shallow and cold, and if you knew how to cast, you could pull trout out before noon. Roscoe would wander the banks, chasing leaves, tail wagging, barking at the occasional squirrel or dragonfly. Afternoons were slow, naps in the shade, reading a book I never finished, watching the sunlight dance on the river. I made coffee over the fire, listened to birds I couldn't name, and didn't check a single watch. Nights were the best part. I'd start a fire around dusk, cook dinner, and watch the woods turn dark. It was quiet, but not dead. The forest was always making small noises, twigs snapping, wind in the canopy, water moving around stones. Sometimes I'd hear owls calling, or coyotes yipping far off in the hills. But none of it was threatening. It was the kind of quiet that made you feel part of the world again, like you hadn't spent the last 2 decades behind a desk. I kept a journal during those first few days. Just notes. Thoughts. I remember one line I wrote on the 3rd morning. Nothing out here wants anything from me. That's why it feels like home. But peace doesn't last. Not in this kind of story. It happened gradually. A shift. A tension in the trees. At first, I blamed myself. Said I was just too deep into my own head. Too long without other people. Maybe I was starting to hear things. Maybe the isolation was turning on me. Or maybe something else was starting to notice me. That last peaceful night, I sat out by the fire with Roscoe asleep at my feet, snoring gently. The stars were so bright, they made shadows. The air was cold enough to need a jacket, but not cold enough to freeze your fingers. Everything should have felt perfect. But it didn't. Not quite. And the next day, I found the first set of tracks. The morning after that uneasy night started off like the others. At first, I woke to birdsong and the smell of pine and cold dew. Roscoe was already up, nosing around near the riverbank with his ears perked like he'd heard something. I poured myself a cup of campfire coffee, burnt, bitter, but just what I needed, and sat on a log by the fire pit, stretching my back and staring out into the woods. That's when I saw them. Tracks. They started about 20 feet from the edge of the clearing, where the pine needles were thicker and the grass was sparse. At first, I thought they were bear prints, but as I got closer, my stomach started to twist. They weren't bear. The shape was wrong. They were large, each one about the length of my forearm, but not round like a paw. They looked like elongated feet. 5 toes. Almost human, but wider, more splayed, and ending in pointed indentations like claws. I knelt down, brushed some needles aside. The prints were deep, heavier than any man could have made barefoot. Whatever had walked through here was tall, heavy, and moving with purpose. I followed them slowly, Roscoe close at my heel, his body low and tense. The prints circled the RV once, then doubled back toward the fire pit. That's what made me stop cold. They had passed right beside where I'd been sitting the night before. Maybe 10 feet away. I hadn't heard a thing. Not a footstep, not a branch snap. Nothing. Roscoe growled, low and steady, and I looked down to find him staring into the tree line. Not barking. Just that low rumble that comes when a dog senses something he can't explain. His fur was bristling along his back, his body tight as a coiled spring. I'd only seen him like that once before, years ago, when a copperhead had gotten too close to our shed. Something in my chest tightened. A creeping sense of exposure. I was being watched. I tried to write it off. I did everything I could to be logical. Told myself the prints were distorted by rain or by the uneven ground. Maybe a black bear with some deformity. Maybe someone playing a prank, though that made even less sense. Nobody knew where I was. I hadn't seen another soul in 3 days. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. The kind of feeling that rides just beneath the skin. I kept glancing at the tree line, seeing nothing but shadows, yet convinced something was looking back. I tried to settle into my usual routine, fished a little, took a short hike, but I couldn't focus. Every squirrel felt too loud. Every snapped twig sounded too close. I kept one hand on the pocket knife in my belt all day, and I never let Roscoe out of my sight. That evening, I didn't build a fire. I just couldn't. The idea of sitting out in the open, casting light into the woods while I stayed blind to what might be beyond, it felt wrong. Like holding a flashlight in front of your face in the dark, thinking it'll help you see better. It doesn't. It just makes you a target. So I cooked inside the RV, heated up some chili from a can, fed Roscoe, and locked every latch, even the ones I never bothered with before. Roscoe lay at the base of the bed, eyes fixed on the door. He didn't sleep. Not really. He was waiting, listening. And so was I. I tried reading, but the words blurred. I watched a movie on a tiny battery-powered screen, but the sound felt hollow and too loud. Every time the wind rustled the trees, I froze. And then, just before midnight, I heard it. Not a growl. Not an animal cry. Footsteps. Heavy ones. They moved slowly, deliberately, like something huge was walking on 2 legs. I turned off the lantern. Held my breath. My pulse was hammering in my throat. Roscoe stood up and moved toward the door. His body went rigid. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He just stared at the door like he knew what was on the other side. The footsteps circled the RV, gravel shifted. A low creak in the grass. Then silence. No birds. No crickets. No wind. Just the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels listening. I sat there for hours, shotgun in my lap, heart pounding like a drumline, sweat dripping down my back despite the cold. Nothing happened. Not yet. But I had the undeniable sense that the forest wasn't just alive. It was aware. When morning came, I stepped outside and found more tracks. Fresher this time. Closer. There were claw marks on the side of the RV, scratches at the door. Something had tested it. And for the first time since I arrived, I knew, truly knew, I was not alone in those woods. Not alone, and not welcome. That night began with stillness. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. The sky was cloudless, the moon sharp and bright, casting long shadows through the pines around the campsite. It should have felt safe, lit up like that. But it didn't. Roscoe was tense from the moment the sun dipped. He paced inside the RV, moving between the windows and the door. I watched him, uneasy, and double-checked every lock, doors, windows, storage hatches. I even slid a chair under the front door handle, like that would do anything if something really wanted in. I tried to act normal. Made a can of beans on the stove, gave Roscoe a little beef jerky from my stash. He didn't eat it. That was my first real sign something was wrong. Roscoe never turned down jerky. Around 11:30, I killed the lantern and laid down on the small cot. I couldn't sleep, just stared at the ceiling, listening. Roscoe lay by the door, ears perked, unmoving. Then came the sound. It started soft, like something large brushing against a pine tree. Then crunching footsteps. Not the scattered sound of a deer or the heavy thump of a bear. These were bipedal. 2 deliberate steps. Then another. Getting closer. Roscoe growled. This deep, guttural sound I'd never heard from him before. I sat up and reached for the shotgun I'd kept propped against the cabinet. My hands trembled. The footsteps stopped. Silence. And then 3 knocks. Not on the door. On the side of the RV, low. Slow. Like something was trying to let me know it was right there. Roscoe lunged at the door and started barking like mad. I rushed forward, yelling his name, trying to hold him back, when the entire RV shook. A massive thud hit the side panel, like something the size of a grizzly had slammed into it. Dishes rattled. The windows flexed. I backed away, holding the shotgun tight. Another blow. Then scratching. Not random. Not animalistic. Intentional. I don't know what came over me. Stupid courage. Maybe panic. But I opened the curtain a crack and peeked through the front windshield. There, at the edge of the clearing, was a figure. It stood upright. Towering. Maybe 7 feet. Maybe more. Its body was covered in coarse, dark fur that shimmered under the moonlight. The limbs were wrong. Too long. Too thin. It didn't move like a bear. It didn't move like anything I'd seen before. Its eyes. God, those eyes. They glowed yellow. Not from the reflection of the moon, from within. Like lanterns lit from inside its skull. And it was watching. I couldn't breathe. Then Roscoe did something I'll never forget. He slipped past me and charged out the door I hadn't realized I'd left unlocked in my panic. I screamed his name and lunged, but it was too late. He was out in the open, barking and charging at the thing like he was 10 times his size. The creature didn't run. It didn't flinch. It moved fast. So fast it was a blur. One moment it was standing. The next, it was on top of Roscoe. There was a horrible noise. Not a growl. Not a bark. A scream. A wet, gurgling sound that cut straight through me. I opened the door, shotgun raised, screamed his name, fired blindly into the dark. The blast lit up the clearing for half a second. The creature was gone. So was Roscoe. I ran out, bare feet crunching gravel and pine needles. The night was so quiet, I could hear my own breathing. Fast, ragged, on the verge of a sob. I called his name again and again. Then I saw him. Roscoe was lying near the fire pit, his body torn open. Still, I dropped to my knees beside him, numb. There was no blood trail from a struggle. No tracks leading away. Just those same, awful footprints surrounding his body. Those long, clawed toes embedded deep in the soil. Whatever had done this, it hadn't come to haunt. It had come for him. And I had no doubt in my heart, I was next. I don't remember standing up. One moment, I was kneeling over Roscoe's broken body. The next, I was on my feet, shotgun in hand, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I was shaking. My whole body was vibrating with this primal, electric fear. I wasn't thinking. I couldn't. There was only one instinct left in me. Run. I stumbled back into the RV and slammed the door. My hands fumbled at the lock, nearly missing it. The shotgun clattered to the floor as I grabbed the keys from the hook. I turned the ignition with trembling fingers. Nothing. Just a dry clicking sound. I turned it again, harder, yelling at it. Come on, come on. Still nothing. Outside, the forest was deathly still. Not even the wind moved. That thing was still out there. I could feel it, like pressure against the windows, like breath on the back of my neck. I grabbed my flashlight and a backup set of keys from the cabinet, then bolted out the door and ran toward the emergency battery compartment under the RV. My boots thudded against the dirt, the world collapsing into short, jagged breaths and crunching gravel. I flung open the panel and jiggled the connectors like my life depended on it, because it did. And then I heard it. A low growl from the tree-line. Long. Drawn out. It was close again. I didn't dare look up. I just ran, straight back to the driver's seat, climbed in, jammed the key into the ignition again, and turned it so hard I thought I'd snap it. This time, the engine coughed. Then again. Then finally, mercifully, roared to life. I slammed it into gear. The RV lurched forward. The side mirror clipped a tree as I fishtailed through the clearing. I didn't care. I didn't care about trees or mud or tearing up the bumper. I needed out. I caught a glimpse in the rearview mirror. It was standing in the middle of the clearing, still as a statue, watching. The glowing yellow eyes locked on mine one last time before the forest swallowed it whole. The road out of Allegheny was rough, narrow, winding, full of dips and turns that felt like they'd ripped the axle clean off. I didn't care. I was going 50, then 60. Branches slapped the windshield, bugs exploded against the glass, and still I pressed harder on the gas. I didn't stop until I saw pavement. Didn't slow down until I hit a gas station just outside Kane, Pennsylvania. I pulled in, threw it into park, stumbled out, and collapsed by the ice chest outside the convenience store, dry heaving and crying like a child. A man came out, wide-eyed, asking if I was okay. I must have looked like a ghost, shirt bloody, arms scratched, eyes wide and hollow. I told him what happened, or at least tried to. I don't remember what I said exactly. Maybe I just kept repeating Roscoe's name. The cops showed up. A ranger came too. I explained what I saw, what I experienced. I described the creature. I begged them to check the site. I gave them the GPS location. And just like I expected, they didn't believe a damn word. The ranger scribbled in a little notepad like he was humoring a crazy old man. The deputy suggested maybe it was a bear. I asked him if he'd ever seen a bear with hands and yellow eyes that stand up like a man. He didn't answer. I drove back to Harrisburg that night, running on adrenaline and gas station coffee. I didn't stop to sleep. I didn't even shower. I just parked in my driveway, walked inside, and sat on the floor with my back against the door. I didn't move for hours. Roscoe was gone, torn to pieces. And the thing that did it wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man. It was something else. And it was still out there, somewhere in those woods. Watching, waiting, maybe even hunting again. After I got home, things didn't go back to normal. Not even close. The first week, I didn't leave the house. I couldn't sleep, not really. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Roscoe's body. I heard that growl again. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart hammering like I was back in those woods. I stopped eating, just drank black coffee and stared out the living room window, shotgun across my lap, waiting for something I couldn't name. Neighbors noticed. A few stopped by, asking if I was okay. I lied and said I was fine. They didn't press. I guess people don't really want to hear the truth when it's messy, when it doesn't fit into what they think the world should be. A week turned into 2, then a month. Eventually, I went back to work at the auto shop, but I wasn't really there. I'd zone out in the middle of jobs. One time, I left a wrench on a hot engine block and nearly caused a fire. My boss, Dan, took me aside and asked what was going on. I told him I'd seen something out in Allegheny I couldn't explain. He said, "You mean a bear?" and patted me on the back like that was supposed to fix it. I started drinking more. Not to party, just to sleep. Whiskey helped dull the edges. Some nights I blacked out just to avoid the dreams. But they always found their way back. One night, 6 months after it happened, I lost it completely. I was sitting on my porch with a bottle in my hand and a loaded shotgun beside me. It was windy, the kind of night where leaves scratch against the siding and branches knock like they're trying to get in. I thought I saw something moving in the woods behind the house. Glowing eyes, long limbs. I fired off 2 rounds into the trees. The cops showed up 20 minutes later. They didn't arrest me, just talked me down, told me to get help. I did. Dr. Lee Reeves, PTSD specialist out of Reading. She listened better than most. Never rolled her eyes, never cut me off. After a few sessions, she said something I never forgot. Whatever you saw, real or not, your brain registered it as trauma. That's not crazy. That's human. It helped. A little. She put me on a treatment plan. Therapy, sleep meds, journal writing. I tried it all. I even stopped drinking for a while. But the fear never left. It just got quieter. What changed everything was the internet. One night, about a year later, I was up late, too wired to sleep. I typed "creature sightings Allegheny National Forest" into a search bar. Thought maybe I'd find some silly cryptid blog or bored teenagers telling stories. But I found dozens of accounts. People like me. Some from years earlier, some more recent. Most dismissed by authorities. All describing the same thing. Huge, humanoid figure, long limbs, glowing eyes, horrific sound. I read for hours. One comment stood out. A user named OldFrank57 said, "I lost a dog out there too. Near Clarion River. Not a bear. Never a bear." That's when it clicked. I wasn't alone. The next weekend, I drove out to a diner near the edge of the forest, one of the spots mentioned in the forum. I posted in the thread that I'd be there if anyone wanted to talk. 3 people showed up. A retired park ranger from the 90s, a woman whose brother vanished on a solo camping trip in '85, and a man who swore he'd seen a tall shadow with no face, watching his fire from just outside the tree line. We started meeting once a month. We didn't call ourselves anything official, but we had a group. Survivors, witnesses, people too haunted to forget and too stubborn to stay quiet. We shared maps, theories, timelines. We started tracking the stories. It helped. For the first time since that night, I felt like I wasn't going insane. I wasn't alone. And I wasn't done. Not yet. We never picked a name. We weren't exactly a club or a team, just 4 people bonded by trauma, each of us carrying a scar no one else could see. We met every first Saturday of the month at a diner off Route 66 near Kane, Pennsylvania. The place had that classic, wood-paneled interior with booths lined in faded green vinyl. The kind of place that smelled like bacon grease and burnt coffee no matter what time you walked in. We always sat in the back corner, away from the windows. There was me, of course. Then there was Frank Carraway, the retired ranger, tall, wiry, always in that same canvas jacket with a patch that said supervisor, even though he hadn't worn the title in years. He was the first to show up that day. I put out the online message. Said he'd seen something in '93 while tracking a missing camper. It moved like it didn't need to obey gravity, he told us once. Like it was trying to pretend to be a bear, but couldn't quite get it right. Then there was Rachel Shaw. Her brother, Daniel, had gone missing in 1985 on a solo trip. No body, no tent, nothing. Just a campsite near the river and a set of tracks leading into the woods that stopped cold, like something had picked him up and walked off without leaving a trace. She was the quiet one, always watching, listening. Sometimes she'd scribble in a little black notebook during meetings, but never said what she was writing. And finally there was Mark Tilson, a trucker from Ohio who'd been driving a route through northern PA one night when he saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. I thought it was roadkill at first, he told us. Then it stood up. 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Just stood there, watching me. I swerved and damn near rolled the cab, trying to avoid it. All of us had stories. Different in detail, but the same in feeling. The sense that something was watching. The glowing eyes. The unnatural size. The way it moved. Not fast, but wrong. Like it was built from muscle and memory, but didn't belong to this world. We started tracking sightings. Rachel set up a spreadsheet. Frank added old ranger incident reports. I compiled maps and timelines. We cross-referenced dates, seasons, even lunar phases. There wasn't always a pattern, but there were clusters. Strange disappearances along the Clarion River. Sightings near abandoned cabins. Howls or screeches recorded by hunters and hikers between midnight and 4 a.m. And then, we started hearing about the marks. Long, claw-like gouges in RV doors. Scratches carved into trees too high up for any bear. Even boulders overturned at campsites, big ones. Rachel had a stack of photos printed from people who'd shared online. We laid them out across the table like evidence in a trial. Frank would lean over, his brow furrowed, and mutter, "Ain't no damn animal I know leaves a mark like that." Sometimes new people would show up. One guy, a former cop, said his patrol partner vanished while hiking on his day off, found his pack shredded to ribbons and nothing else. Another, a woman who ran a wilderness therapy program, talked about losing 2 teens during a foggy night hike. They were just gone, she whispered. And that forest didn't feel empty. It felt full. Too full. Most of them never came back for a second meeting. That was the thing. This group, it helped. It gave you something to hold on to. But it didn't make you feel better. Because every new story, every new face, was another confirmation. Another person marked. Another name to add to the list of the hunted. I kept thinking about Roscoe. About how I'd let him die. How I'd buried him in shallow dirt with my bare hands while trying not to look at what had been done to him. That guilt never faded, no matter how many miles I hiked or how many sightings I logged. But it also gave me a reason. I couldn't just let it in there. At one of our meetings, Frank passed me an old manila folder. It was from his time as a ranger. "Not supposed to have this," he said, "but you need to see it." Inside were a dozen incident reports from 1978 to 2001. Most were written off as missing persons or wildlife encounters. But Frank had marked them. Each one included a strange note. unknown tracks, resembling human, but distorted. Or unexplained animal sounds. No known match in regional database. Some of the victims had dogs with them. None of the dogs were found. I think it's hunting, Frank said one night, his voice low. Not just randomly appearing. Hunting in cycles. Every few years. Same area. Same outcome. That thought haunted me. We weren't just dealing with a strange creature. We were dealing with a predator. I started hiking again. Carefully. Always armed. Always alert. I'd go out to old campsites, abandoned ranger cabins, trailheads that hadn't been used in decades. Sometimes I brought a camera. Sometimes a thermal scope. Mostly, I just listened. And on 2 different nights, I heard it again. The sound that started it all. That low, guttural, rattling growl that sounds like something dragging gravel through its throat. Once, I caught a pair of glowing eyes reflecting back at me from the tree lean, then gone in a blink. I didn't chase it. Not yet. Because the group and we were close. We felt it. A trail was forming. A pattern emerging. We just needed one more piece. One undeniable encounter. One moment that could turn all the whispers and scars into evidence. I knew I had to go back to where it happened. To where I lost Roscoe. Where it all began. And this time, I wouldn't be running. It had been 15 years since Roscoe died. 15 years since I sped down that gravel road, hands trembling, my dog's blood still drying on my boots. I'd spent every day since trying to forget, and every night chasing shadows in my head. But forgetting never worked. The forest always came back. The sound of splintering branches, the breathing outside my RV, those eyes in the dark. So now, I was going back. But this time I was ready. The trip was simple. I packed light, but smart. Motion sensors, trail cams, a thermal imaging scope, and a brand new Nikon with night vision capabilities. I'd learned a lot since that night. Learned what not to do. No drinking. No careless wandering. No underestimating the woods. I drove up in a newer RV, smaller but better built. I'd reinforced the doors, upgraded the locks. Solar panels charged my equipment. I even brought a backup generator. And yes, I was armed this time. A 12-gauge Mossberg loaded with slugs. Not because I thought I could kill it, but because if it came down to that, I wasn't going to die cowering. The old campsite was still there, tucked beside the Clarion River, untouched by tourists or hikers. It was just how I remembered it, which made it worse. The fire pit, the mossy rocks, the clearing where Roscoe used to lie in the sun, all of it felt frozen in time. The first night was quiet. Too quiet. I set up a ring of motion sensors and 3 trail cams covering the tree line. Every hour, I reviewed the feeds. Static. Wind. A raccoon once. But no glowing eyes. No footsteps. No breathing. But I knew it was watching. You don't feel that kind of pressure in your chest unless something is out there. On the second night, things changed. Just after 2 a.m., a motion sensor tripped. The alert buzzed on my phone, northeast perimeter. I grabbed the thermal scope, stepped out onto the porch, and scanned the tree line. Something was moving. Big. Upright. The shape flickered in and out of heat range, like it was ducking between trees. It stopped just inside the line of ferns, staring toward me. Then it waved. A long, slow gesture, just like a human. My blood ran cold. I blinked, and it was gone. The next morning, I checked the trail cam footage. That camera had been turned off, not dead, not damaged. Just switched off. That night, I set new cameras and replaced the batteries. I left bait. Not meat, but an old dog collar. Roscoe's. I'd kept it all these years. It still smelled like him. At 3:18 a.m., everything went to hell. All the cameras went out at once. Static. The motion sensors screamed. My RV rocked like something had grabbed it from both sides and pushed. I jumped out, shotgun in one hand, camera in the other. There it was, standing just outside the fire pit, outlined by moonlight. 7, maybe 8 feet tall, covered in tangled hair. Its arms hung down almost to its knees. But the face, God, the face. It was wrong. Not fully human. Not fully beast. Its eyes glowed, not with reflection, but with light. A soft, horrible amber glow, like old coal deep in the ground. I lifted the camera, snapped 3 rapid shots. It didn't move. I lowered the lens. It looked right at me, and nodded. Then it stepped back into the trees, disappearing without a sound. The next morning, I reviewed the footage. The photos were clear. No blurs. No shaky hands. Just proof. A creature that shouldn't exist. I emailed copies to Frank, Rachel, and the rest of the group. I uploaded encrypted backups to cloud storage. Then I drove back to town with every window locked and every light on. I gave the photos to a local reporter. She laughed at first, until I told her where to look. I gave coordinates, descriptions. I gave her the full story. She promised to publish it. I haven't heard from her since. Later that week, someone broke into my house. They didn't take anything, just rifled through my desk, my files, my backup drives. Whoever they were careful, but not careful enough. I saw the same tracks outside my window the next morning. Three-toed, wide gate, deep, like it had followed me home. So now I don't sleep much. I keep the shotgun beside my bed. The lights stay on. I haven't gone back to Allegheny, not yet. But I know I will. It's only a matter of time. I have questions. I have fear. But more than anything, I have unfinished business. And I know it's still out there. Watching. Waiting. I wasn't trying to disappear forever, just needed a damn break. That fall, I was 46 years old, single, and exhausted from a lifetime of fluorescent lighting and weekend phone calls from my boss. I'd been working IT contracts around Salt Lake City for 20+ years. Good money, no complaints, but something in me had started to itch. I guess that's the best way to put it. Not a physical itch, but a mental one. Like my brain was slowly suffocating inside the 4 beige walls of my apartment. So I did something I hadn't done in almost a decade. I dusted off the old RV, a 1981 Winnebago I'd inherited from my uncle, and pointed it east toward the Uinta Mountains. I packed enough freeze-dried meals for 2 weeks, a beat-up copy of Lonesome Dove, and brought along the one living creature that never judged me, Rufus. He was an 8-year-old mutt with shaggy brown and white fur, part retriever, part maybe sheepdog. Loyal as hell. His tail started wagging the second he saw the hiking boots come out, and he practically exploded when he jumped into the passenger seat. You'd think he knew we were chasing something bigger than just trout and trees. The drive itself felt like therapy. Highway noise faded as we climbed into higher elevations. Pine trees thickened on either side of the road, framing the asphalt like old sentinels. By the time I reached the turnoff Tom had told me about, a narrow dirt path barely wide enough for the RV, the sun was dipping low, casting long amber fingers through the canopy. After some white-knuckled maneuvering, we arrived at the clearing. It was breathtaking. A perfectly still alpine lake shimmered like glass just beyond a stand of aspen. There were no signs, no campsites, no tire marks, just wilderness. Rufus bounded out before I could even kill the engine, already sniffing the edges of the tree line, tail high. I stepped out and just stood there for a second. There was something clean about the air. Not just fresh, clean. Like every breath was erasing the grime from my lungs. I set up the camp slowly, savoring each task, leveling the RV, arranging the folding chairs, laying out firewood. By the time I cracked open a beer and sat down by the lake, stars had begun poking through the dark velvet sky. That night, everything was still. Silent. I don't mean quiet. I mean still. No breeze. No rustling leaves. Even the insects seemed to have packed it in for the night. Rufus curled up beside the fire, letting out one of those deep dog sighs that always made me smile. We shared a couple of hot dogs, listened to the crackling fire, and for the first time in what felt like years, I felt at peace. I remember saying out loud, "This is it, buddy. This is the kind of quiet I could get used to. If only I'd known that silence was a warning. The kind you don't recognize until it's already too late." The second day started off like a dream. The sun rose slow and lazy over the mountains, casting that golden light that makes even a busted old RV look like a postcard. I brewed coffee over the camp stove, thick, black, and probably stronger than necessary, and watched the steam curl up into the chilled air. Rufus padded up beside me, stretching out his legs and yawning like he'd slept off 10 years of worry. We spent the morning hiking along the tree line near the lake. Rufus led the way, tail wagging, nose down. He was in his element. I took pictures of the fall foliage, skipped rocks across the water, and tried not to think about the deadlines, the emails, or the noise waiting for me back in Salt Lake. By late afternoon, we were back at camp. I grilled up some trout I'd caught, tossed Rufus a chunk, and cracked open another beer. The shadows started stretching long across the clearing, and the woods turned that deep bluish green you only get right before full dark. The kind of color that makes everything feel older, heavier. That's when it started. First, the birds went quiet. 1 minute, there was the usual chatter, some jays, maybe a hawk off in the distance, and the next, it just stopped. No wind, no bugs, nothing. I sat still for a long moment, noticing how loud the absence had become. Rufus noticed it too. He stopped mid-chew, ears perked, his eyes fixed on the trees like he'd just remembered something bad. Then came the movement. It was just a flicker at first, something tall, something wrong, shifting behind the trees across the clearing. Rufus let out a low growl. It wasn't his stranger's nearby bark, either. This one came from deeper in his throat, more like a warning than anything else. I turned and scanned the woods with my flashlight, but I didn't see anything, not really. Just the usual mess of branches and shadow. But that's the thing. Something about the shadows felt different. They weren't just dark. They were deep, like there was more space inside them than there should have been. And then I caught it. A shape, just for a second, moving behind the trees. Too tall, too fast. It wasn't walking. It was gliding, like its legs were moving, but it barely touched the ground. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. Or maybe a deer. A big one. But I'd lived in Utah my whole life. I know deer. I know elk. And that wasn't either. Rufus pressed up against my leg, tail between his legs, still growling. I reached down and rested a hand on his back, trying to steady myself as much as him. Then the fire shifted. Not the wind, the fire itself. It flared suddenly, sending sparks into the air, like something had passed through it or breathed on it from the other side. I stood there frozen for what felt like forever, waiting for another sign. Another shape. Another sound. But there was nothing. Just that impossible silence. That night, I locked the RV door tight and kept Rufus inside. He wouldn't stop pacing, and I couldn't stop staring out the tiny window at the woods beyond. There was no sleep, only that stillness. That feeling in my chest like something was watching. The thing is, sometimes the forest goes quiet because it's peaceful. Other times, it's because something else has stepped into it, and everything that lives there knows to shut the hell up. That night, the wind picked up. Not a gentle mountain breeze, but something sharper, colder, like it was pushing in from some forgotten ridge, slicing between the trees and setting the pine branches to sway and creak. Buckley Drayton stood outside the RV for a long time, just watching the fire crackle. Rufus sat at his side, ears high, body tense. Buck tried to distract himself by poking at the flames with a stick, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The silence had returned, that same eerie hush from the night before, and it wrapped around the clearing like a suffocating blanket. No insects, no owls, no rustling brush. Just the fire and the occasional snap of dead wood shifting beneath its heat. He'd been about to pour himself a whiskey when Rufus let out a sudden, vicious snarl. Buck turned, startled, and followed his dog's gaze toward the far edge of the firelight, the tree line just beyond his camp. There, for a brief, heart-stopping moment, he saw it. A tall shape, almost blending into the dark. Unnaturally still. Towering. The kind of thing your mind tries to smooth into something ordinary. A crooked trunk, maybe, or a cluster of branches. But it wasn't. Because it moved. Buck blinked and it was gone. Vanished into the woods like it had been a trick of the light. But Rufus didn't think so. The dog was growling low, backing up until he was practically pressed to Buck's leg. That was no deer. No bear. And it sure as hell wasn't a man. Buck's hands trembled as he fumbled to toss a few more logs into the fire, trying to push the light out further. He didn't want to go into the RV. Not yet. The thought of closing the door and not seeing what was coming, that scared him more than the cold. Then the scream came. It tore through the forest like a blade. High-pitched, wet, and unnatural. It wasn't the howl of a coyote or the warning call of a cougar. It sounded wrong. Like something in pain. Or mimicking pain. Buck dropped his whiskey cup. Rufus started barking wildly, tail between his legs. The scream came again, closer this time, and with it, a crashing noise from the trees, like something huge was moving, snapping branches underfoot. Buck backed up toward the RV, trying not to run. He didn't want to set off whatever it was. Just before reaching the door, he turned back and saw it. Half lit by the fire and moonlight, it stepped into view. The creature stood a good 7, maybe 8 feet tall, hunched, with limbs too long for its frame. Its skin, if you could call it that, looked pale gray-green, mottled like stone and lichen. The eyes were small, black, and deeply set, but they gleamed like wet glass. And the mouth was the worst. It stretched too wide, like someone had sliced it into the face with a knife. No lips, just rows of narrow, pointed teeth that caught the firelight when it hissed. It didn't charge. It just stood there, watching. Buck slammed the RV door and locked it with shaking fingers, nearly tripping over Rufus. The dog was going berserk, barking and growling at the windows. The whole RV rocked slightly, and Buck dropped to the floor, shotgun in hand, waiting for the thing to come. Outside, the fire cracked and then died. Darkness swallowed the clearing, and all Buck could hear was breathing, low, ragged breathing, just outside the walls. The moment the last ember died outside, the RV became a coffin of silence. Buck sat on the floor, shotgun across his lap, sweat chilling on his skin. Rufus was pacing the length of the RV, growling, then whining, then growling again. Outside, something brushed against the aluminum siding with a long, deliberate scrape. Buck's breath hitched. He leaned back slowly and reached up to flick off the interior lights. The glow vanished, leaving only the faint moonlight filtering through the drawn blinds. Then a thud. The RV rocked, not much, but enough to knock over the half-drunk bottle of water on the counter. Another thud, this one louder, closer to the back where the bed was. Rufus froze and whimpered. Something was walking around the RV. It circled, slow and steady, like a predator sizing up prey. There was no mistaking it now. Whatever had screamed in the woods, whatever had stared at him with that toothy grin, it was here. And it wasn't shy. A loud, metallic rattle came from the passenger side door. Buck snapped the shotgun up and aimed, though he couldn't see anything through the window. The handle jiggled again. Not hard, not frantic, just testing. Go away, Buck whispered, barely audible even to himself. The scratching started then. Fingernails, or something worse, dragged slowly down the side of the RV, back and forth, over and over, like it was drawing symbols into the metal. Buck glanced at Rufus, who was shaking now, tail fully tucked, eyes fixed on the kitchen window. Buck crawled forward and peeked through the smallest gap in the curtain. He shouldn't have looked. The thing was right there, inches from the glass. Its face was pressed close, mouth slightly open in a grin that seemed to stretch up toward its cheekbones. The skin looked diseased up close, almost rotting, like old bark peeling from a dead tree. Its breath fogged the glass in slow, measured exhales. Buck stared, paralyzed, as one of its clawed fingers rose and tapped the window twice. Tap, tap. Buck fell back, his hand slamming the curtain shut. He wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The shotgun felt like a toy in his grip. If that thing wanted in, would it even need to try? Suddenly, the RV rocked hard, as if something had leapt onto the roof. Rufus barked like mad, jumping toward the ceiling, tail wagging in panic, not joy. Buck scrambled to the bed, yanking open a cabinet to grab his flare gun. His hand shook so badly he nearly dropped it. Another thud, this time directly above him. The roof creaked under shifting weight. Then silence. Buck waited. Seconds passed. Then a minute. Rufus whimpered but stopped barking. Buck raised the flare gun toward the ceiling, unsure if he'd actually fire through it or just wait for death. The silence stretched. And then, a whisper. Not a sound from outside. Not a breath. A whisper, inside the RV, somewhere behind him. He turned slowly. No one was there. The door was still locked. The windows still shut. But the whisper had been real, like a voice made of wind sliding between thoughts. It hadn't spoken English. It hadn't said words. But Buck understood it. You are in my place. And just like that, the creature was gone. No more scratching. No more shaking. The oppressive air lifted just a bit. Outside, the trees moved gently in a breeze that had returned without warning. Buck stayed awake till sunrise, shotgun in one hand, flare gun in the other. He didn't sleep. Not a second. When the first light broke over the trees and cut through the blinds, he didn't hesitate. He grabbed Rufus in the essentials, started the engine, and by some miracle, it turned over on the first try. Buck didn't look back when he hit the gas. The RV's tires spat gravel and pine needles as it lurched forward, bouncing along the dirt road like a wounded animal desperate to escape. The morning sun had barely crested the peaks, but its golden light felt like salvation. Rufus sat low in the passenger seat, trembling, his eyes fixed on the window, ears flattened. Neither of them made a sound. Buck's hands were clenched so tight on the wheel, his knuckles had gone white. Every bump, every pothole made the RV groan, and every noise outside sent a fresh jolt of panic through his chest. He couldn't stop imagining the thing. The way it had looked through the window, the breath on the glass, the impossibly wide mouth filled with jagged teeth. His stomach twisted. 10 minutes into the drive, Buck risked a glance into the rearview mirror. Nothing. Just the winding dirt road fading behind them, swallowed again by the dense wall of evergreens. But that didn't mean it wasn't still back there. The road to the main highway felt like it had tripled in length. The forest seemed tighter, darker, even as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Buck passed familiar landmarks, a bent pine tree shaped like an archway, a boulder with spray-painted initials, but they felt like remnants from another life, symbols from a dream that had curdled into a nightmare. At one point, the RV rounded a bend and a deer darted across the road. Buck slammed on the brakes, heart nearly leaping from his chest. Rufus yelped. The deer vanished, and Buck sat there for a moment, the engine rumbling beneath him, his breath loud and ragged in the silence. Finally, the trees broke. The dirt faded into cracked pavement. A weathered wooden sign welcomed him back to Uinta Wilderness Recreation Area, its letters faded by time and sun. He didn't stop driving. It wasn't until he reached the outskirts of Vernal, Utah, a solid 45 miles away, that Buck finally pulled into a gas station and killed the engine. He just sat there, motionless, letting the world catch up. Rufus whimpered and climbed into his lap like a terrified child, tail tucked, shaking against his chest. Buck wrapped his arms around the dog and stared out the windshield. What was that thing? He'd seen bears before. Mountain lions. Wolves. This was not that. This was something older. Something wrong. Inside the gas station, the clerk asked if he was okay. Buck didn't answer at first. Just bought 2 bottles of water and a pack of cigarettes. Even though he'd quit 5 years ago. When he paid, his hands were still shaking. He drove straight home after that. Didn't stop. Didn't eat. Didn't sleep. And Rufus? Rufus never barked again. Not the way he used to. Not playfully. That night in the RV took something from him too. Whatever that thing was, it changed them both. Buck would tell himself later that they got lucky. That maybe it was a territorial thing. Maybe they disturbed something ancient, something that just wanted them gone. But deep down, he knew the truth. It could have killed them if it wanted to. It didn't. It let them leave. Which was worse. Back home in Salt Lake City, Buck tried to forget. But the forest didn't let go that easy. He returned to his garage job, fixed transmissions, rotated tires, smiled when customers asked about his trip. He told them it was peaceful, relaxing, everything he needed. But Rufus wouldn't go near trees anymore. Wouldn't even step off the porch after dark. And Buck, he couldn't sleep. He kept hearing it. That scream. That inhuman, bone-deep wail that had rolled through the woods like thunder from some forgotten era. It would echo in his dreams, long after the fire died and the RV was gone. One Saturday, about 3 weeks after the incident, Buck stopped into a small bar on the edge of town. A dive called Denton's Place, known for 2 things, strong drinks and stronger gossip. He wasn't looking for answers, just whiskey. But what he got was something else. He was sitting alone at the bar, nursing his 3rd glass of Jack, when an older guy 2 stools down said, "You look like you've seen it too." Buck blinked. Seen what? The Wraith. The man's name was Charlie Kinney. Long gray beard, trucker's cap, eyes too sharp for someone supposedly drunk. He smelled like cedar and gasoline. Uinta Wraith, Charlie said, leaning closer. That's what they call it up there. Been around longer than we have. Some folks say it used to be a man. A trapper who went mad. Others say it's something older. Something from before there were words for it. Buck listened, transfixed. Charlie wasn't joking. I saw it back in '89, he continued. Was elk hunting. Early fall. Just like you. I thought I'd found the perfect spot. Then the woods went quiet. And it stepped out from behind the trees. Real slow. Long arms, head tilted, like it was studying me. Buck's mouth went dry. Did it chase you? Charlie laughed, but there was no humor in it. Didn't have to. It just screamed. Right there in the middle of the clearing. Dropped me to my damn knees. Couldn't move. Couldn't think. I woke up 3 miles from my gear, nose bleeding, ears ringing. Buck asked, why does it do that? Why let us go? Charlie looked into his glass like he expected the answer to float there. Some say it feeds off fear. Others think it's guarding something. But me? I think it chooses who walks out. That night, Buck went down a rabbit hole. Online forums, old newspaper clippings, park ranger reports. The deeper he looked, the more he found. Blurry photos, cryptic audio recordings, people describing exactly what he'd seen. Always the same. Tall, thin, glowing eyes, a mouth full of teeth, and that scream. Locals had whispered about it for generations. Hunters, hikers, even park rangers who quit and never spoke of it again. A name came up over and over, the Uinta Wraith. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't alone. And worst of all, it wasn't finished with him. Some nights, Buck dreamed of the mountains. Not in the peaceful way you'd expect from a man who once found serenity in the trees, but in that cold sweat, heart-racing kind of way where the dream feels more real than the waking world. In those dreams, he was always back there. In that clearing, standing beside the fire, and Rufus was growling low beside him. The silence would come. Then the scream. Always the scream. It had been 2 years since the trip, and Buckley Drayton hadn't returned to the woods. Not once. He sold the RV 6 months after the incident. Couldn't even stand to look at it sitting in the driveway. It wasn't just that it reminded him of what happened. It was that it somehow still smelled like it. That odd mixture of sap, damp soil, and something feral that clung to the walls no matter how many times he scrubbed. Rufus had changed, too. The happy-go-lucky dog that once bounded out the door at the jingle of keys now refused to leave the house. He'd sit by the door and whimper any time Buck laced up his boots, even if it was just to check the mailbox. His tail hadn't wagged in months. People around Buck started to notice. He laughed less, talked even less, stopped going to barbecues, skipped family birthdays. His sister asked if he was sick. He told her he was just tired. But he wasn't tired. He was waiting for the scream again. It happened randomly, once while walking through a grocery store freezer aisle, another time while sitting in traffic. No one else heard it. Just Buck. That same high, broken screech, like something ancient trying to force its way into this world through his ears. He saw it too sometimes. Just a glimpse, in the reflection of a puddle, or in the grainy edge of a security camera at the gas station. Tall, pale, watching, never moving, never blinking. He tried everything. Therapy, meds, even church. Nothing helped. He reached out to Charlie again, hoping the old man had something more to say, something useful. But Denton's place was shuttered. Closed down after a fire, the article said. No one could find Charlie. It was like the Wraith had erased him. So Buck did what he'd sworn never to do. He wrote everything down, every detail, every sound, every image still burned into his mind. He posted it anonymously online, hoping maybe, just maybe, someone else would come forward. And they did. Emails. Dozens. Then hundreds. Some were clearly fake, trolls looking for a scare. But a few were just like his. Word for word. Mountain ranges different. But always the same creature. Always the same scream. Buck came to understand something, slowly, painfully. This thing, this Wraith, it didn't live in the woods. Not just there. It lived in memory. In silence. In trauma. Like a parasite latching onto your fear and growing stronger the more you try to forget. He never went back to the Uinta Range. Never will. But every time the wind hits just right, usually at 3 or 4 a.m., and the trees outside his window sway just a bit too violently, he holds his breath. Because he knows the Wraith never forgets. It lets you go, but it doesn't let you leave. And somewhere out there, beneath the shadowed peaks and the whispering pine, it's still watching. Still screaming. Still waiting. I was 75 the fall we took that trip, though I didn't feel it until we got back. My best friend Hank Browning and I had been through a lot over the years. Bad marriages, worse divorces, a few lucky fishing seasons, and just enough whiskey to call it even. We talked about taking one last camping trip for years. You know the kind. No wives, no phone signal, no reminders of doctor's appointments or the way your knees ache when the weather changes. Just trees, a fire, and the kind of silence you only find where the road ends. So when October rolled around, golden and cool with that late autumn scent in the air, we packed up my old 1978 Winnebago Brave and pointed it west. The Black Hills of South Dakota had always felt like neutral ground to us. Not too far from our homes in Nebraska, but just wild enough to feel like we were young again. Hank was the kind of guy who packed 3 coolers for a weekend trip, 2 for beer, 1 for meat. I brought a few old fishing rods and the same cast iron skillet I'd been using since the 70s. It still smelled like bacon if you held it close. The drive up was quiet, smooth. We took the back highways, the ones that cut through cornfields and old gas stations that hadn't updated their prices since '03. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. We were both just soaking it in. The way the sun hit the windshield, the way the trees changed from green to flame orange to that brittle brown that meant snow wasn't far off. We got to the campsite by late afternoon. It wasn't an official spot, just a clearing Hank swore he'd found back in the early '90s on a hunting trip. Sure enough, it was perfect. About 100 feet off a dirt road, tucked between tall pines, with a narrow creek cutting through one side, and just enough flat space to park the RV and build a fire. The nearest town was 10 miles behind us, and the only sound was wind brushing through the branches and the occasional bird calling out its last notes before dusk. As soon as we parked, Hank was out with a beer in hand, stretching his back like he'd just finished a shift at the steel mill. "This is it, George," he said, arms out like he owned the damn forest. "Nothing but air, dirt, and whatever's out there watching us pee." I laughed and started gathering some wood for the fire. We got the chairs set up, beers cracked open, and burgers sizzling on a small grill by the time the sun began to dip low. The flames danced, painting our faces with flickering gold and shadow. The trees around us loomed tall and silent. I remember thinking how peaceful it felt out there. Like we were outside of time, just two tired men with creaky joints and old jokes, miles away from anything with a screen or a clock. That night, we sat by the fire longer than we should have, the kind of long where the stars start to blur and your beer's gone warm in your hand. Hank was talking about his daughter's wedding, getting choked up in that way men his age do, without ever showing it in their voice. I was half listening, half watching the trees, my eyes tracing the outline of the woods just beyond the firelight. There was something about the way the darkness pressed up against us that night. It felt thicker, still peaceful, but in a way that made me keep glancing behind me, like the woods were holding their breath. Around midnight, we turned in. I took the back bunk. Hank crashed on the fold-out couch in the front. As I lay there listening to the creaks and sighs of the old RV settling into the cold night air, I felt content. My bones hurt from sitting too long. My stomach was full, and for the first time in years, I hadn't thought about bills or doctors or how lonely the house felt with both the kids gone. That was the last night I felt like that, because something else was out there, watching, waiting, and it wasn't done with us yet. We woke up to a perfect morning. The kind you think only exists in old postcards. Crisp, blue skies above, the smell of dew and pine needles below, and that early chill that bites just enough to make your coffee taste better. Hank was already outside when I rolled out of bed, poking at the fire pit and humming something that sounded like an old Willie Nelson tune. We made breakfast, eggs fried in bacon grease, burnt toast from the little RV stovetop, and instant coffee strong enough to knock the rust off our joints. Afterward, we decided to explore a bit, stretch our legs. Hank had spotted a narrow game trail the evening before, just beyond the tree line behind the RV, and figured it might lead down to the creek or somewhere worth fishing. We walked for about 20 minutes, maybe a bit more. The trees were thick here, tall and close, their branches woven like fingers trying to keep the sunlight out. The ground was soft, covered in a blanket of pine needles that muffled our steps. It was quiet, too quiet. Even the birds seemed to be holding back, like the woods were trying to stay still for some reason. That's when we saw it. A cabin, or what was left of one. It wasn't marked on any map we'd looked at. The place looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Roof partially caved in, boards gray and splintered with age, vines curling up the sides like nature was trying to pull it underground. The front door was crooked, hanging from one hinge, and the windows were busted out, shards of dusty glass still clinging to the frames. We stood there for a while, just staring. I don't know why, but something about the place didn't sit right. It wasn't just old. It felt wrong, like it had seen things it shouldn't have, like it didn't want to be found. Hank, of course, was the first to move. "Probably some hunter's cabin from way back," he said, stepping over the sagging porch with the curiosity of a man who never stopped needing to poke things with a stick. "Come on, let's check it out." "I don't know, Hank," I said, hanging back. "Place looks like it's one gust of wind from falling apart." But he was already inside. I followed. The inside was worse than the outside. The air was musty, thick with the scent of rot, and something faintly metallic. The furniture was still there, barely. A broken table, a collapsed bed frame, even a rocking chair in the corner that swayed gently as if it had just been moved. The floor creaked beneath our boots, loud in the silence. "Hey, George," Hank said, kneeling near the doorframe. "Check this out." He was pointing at something carved into the wood. Marks. Claw marks. 3 of them. Deep. Fresh. The pale new wood underneath was exposed, like someone, or something, had dragged sharp nails down it just recently. Not 20 years ago. Maybe not even 20 days ago. We didn't say anything for a moment. Just looked at each other. "There," Hank finally offered, though he didn't sound sure. "Too narrow. Too high up," I muttered. We stepped outside fast after that, suddenly aware of how quiet everything had gotten. I mean dead quiet. No birds. No wind. Just us, and the distant sound of our own breathing. We didn't talk much on the walk back to the RV. Both of us were thinking the same thing, but didn't want to say it out loud. When we finally broke through the trees and saw our old Winnebago sitting there with the smoke from the fire pit curling lazily into the sky, I felt a wave of relief that caught me off guard. Like we'd been holding our breath without realizing it. Hank cracked a beer as soon as we got back. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. We just sat there beside the fire as the shadows grew long across the clearing, and that old cabin sat quietly in the back of our minds, waiting. And that night, the woods waited with it. That night felt off from the start. The moment the sun dipped behind the treetops, the temperature dropped hard and fast. The air turned still, unnaturally still. No chirping crickets. No breeze rustling the branches. Just a flat, heavy silence that seemed to smother the clearing. Hank tried to lighten the mood, cooking up some beans and franks on the little camp stove. He poured us each a drink and talked about his daughter's wedding coming up in November, but I could tell he was forcing it. Every few minutes, he'd glance over his shoulder toward the woods. I kept doing the same. Around 10:30, we turned in. Hank took the fold-out bed up front. I headed to the back of the RV. It was an old rig, but it had always been reliable. Comfortable. Safe. That night, though, it didn't feel like a home away from home. It felt like a tin can surrounded by darkness. I'd barely started to drift off when I heard it. A knock. Soft. Low. Slow. I held my breath. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't an animal brushing past. It was deliberate. A fist, if you could call it that, tapping on the outside wall of the RV. Then came a second knock. Louder. A little higher up. Then a third, on the opposite side. I sat bolt upright, heart thudding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I could hear Hank stirring too. "You hear that?" he whispered from the front. "Yeah," I whispered back, already pulling on my boots. We stayed quiet, listening. There was a scraping sound now. Not like claws on metal, not exactly, but more like something with rough skin or bark was dragging itself along the siding. I grabbed the flashlight from the counter and pointed it toward the narrow window. The curtains were mostly drawn, but I nudged the edge aside just enough to peek through. Nothing. But I swear, I felt it. Something was out there. Close. Then came the worst sound yet. The door handle jiggled. Not hard. Just once. Like something was testing it. Hank was already standing behind me, holding a heavy flashlight like a weapon. His face was pale and tight, eyes wide. "We didn't lock it," he said. I didn't hesitate. I lunged for the door, turned the knob hard, and slammed the deadbolt into place just as something nudged it from the outside. There was a low thud. The RV rocked slightly on its wheels. We backed away slowly, flashlights ready, unsure if we were about to have to fight or flee. But nothing came through. That silence returned. We waited like that for nearly an hour, barely speaking, barely breathing. Every time one of us tried to look out the window, we saw nothing. But we kept hearing it. Circling, sniffing, scratching. I caught the scent of something rotten leaking through the vents. It was sharp and wet, like decomposing leaves mixed with iron. Hank gagged and stuffed an old t-shirt into the air intake by the sink. Around 3 a.m., it all stopped. Just stopped. No more sounds. No more shaking. The forest outside felt dead again. We waited until the first blue light of dawn filtered in through the skylight before we dared open the door. The outside looked the same, but the RV didn't. Deep gashes were torn into the aluminum siding on both sides. Claw marks, unmistakably. Long, deep, uneven. Something had been trying to get in, not just to scare us. It wanted inside. We didn't talk. We just stood there, staring at the damage in the cold morning light. Then Hank broke the silence with one word, low and steady, like a man who'd just come to a final decision. We're leaving. And this time, I didn't argue. We packed up fast. Real fast. I barely sipped my coffee, and Hank didn't even finish his cigarette. The scratches along the side of the RV looked worse in daylight, like whatever made them had fingers, or something like fingers. Too long, too uneven, and way too deep. We threw our gear inside, slammed the door shut, and I jumped into the driver's seat. Hank stood near the window, keeping watch with that heavy flashlight like it was a baseball bat. I turned the key. Click. Then nothing. Tried again. Click, click. A brief whir, then silence. You gotta be kidding me, I muttered, reaching down and checking the battery switch, the ignition panel, anything. Tried again. Just a dry cough from the starter. Hank stared at me, unblinking. Battery. No way. It was fine yesterday. Fully charged. We haven't even run the generator. I popped the hood. Everything looked fine. No chewed wires, nothing loose. But the RV was just dead. Like something had drained it, or killed it. You think that thing did something to it? Hank asked, almost too quiet to hear. I didn't answer. Truth is, I didn't know. And I didn't want to start guessing. We stood there a while, the two of us in that still, cold clearing, like the trees were listening. We could hear our own breathing and the creak of the metal siding settling in the sun. But nothing else. Not a bird. Not a breeze. All right, Hank finally said. 10 miles back to town, right? Give or take, I said. But if we take the creek trail, it cuts off a few miles. You trust that trail after last night? No, I admitted. But I trust staying here even less. We packed light, just enough water, a little food, the flashlight, and the old hunting knife. I tucked the map into my jacket and grabbed a flare gun, just in case. I also scrawled a note and pinned it to the RV windshield. Engine dead. Went for help. Back soon. GM and HB. It felt stupid, but something about it gave me a weird sense of control, like we hadn't completely lost our grip on the situation. We locked up the RV, and as we walked away, I glanced back once. Just once. The clearing was quiet, the trees unmoving. But the scratch marks glinted faintly in the sunlight, like a reminder that whatever had been there might still be there. And as we crossed into the woods, leaving behind our little metal sanctuary, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking straight into something's hunting ground. We followed the old game trail for nearly 2 hours, winding deeper into the woods with every cautious step. The air felt heavier somehow, colder than it should have been for a late October morning in South Dakota. The sun filtered weakly through the canopy, painting pale yellow patches on the forest floor that vanished the moment we moved past. Hank kept glancing over his shoulder. I didn't blame him. I could feel it too. Something was off. Like the woods themselves were holding their breath. We kept moving, until the trees abruptly opened up into a small clearing. At its center stood a stone well. It wasn't marked on our map. There were no structures nearby, no cabins or signs of old homesteads. Just that well, leaning slightly to one side like it had been forgotten by time. Moss and vines clung to the stone, and the wooden beam above it was so rotted it looked like it'd snap under its own weight. A length of broken chain dangled where a bucket might have once been. This is new, Hank muttered. I nodded, but didn't reply. My eyes were fixed on the stones. They weren't just old. They were wrong. Weathered, yes, but too smooth in places, like they'd been touched. Often. Hank stepped toward it. Think it still goes down? Don't, I said, sharper than I meant to. Just leave it. But before I could stop him, he leaned over the lip of the well and peered into the darkness. Can't see the bottom, he whispered. That's when we heard it. A low guttural growl. Not a dog. Not a bear. It was deep, unnatural, like it came from inside the earth. It rose up through the stones, vibrating through the ground and into our chests. We both froze. Then, from the shadows just beyond the clearing, it stepped out. The thing was tall, at least 7 feet. Its body was lanky but solid, hunched forward like its joints didn't belong to a human or any animal I'd ever seen. The skin, if you could call it that, was a slick gray-green, mottled like lichen. It shimmered faintly in the cold light. Its limbs were too long, arms that dangled past its knees, fingers tipped with claws. But its face. It had a face. Mostly. Wide, hollow eyes that glowed like a reflection off stagnant water. No lips, just a mouth that stretched across half its skull, packed with thin, needle-like teeth. It looked at us. It saw us. And it smiled. I couldn't move. Neither could Hank. Then it twitched. A single, jerking movement forward like a puppet on frayed strings. That snapped us out of it. Run, I rasped. We didn't need to say it twice. We turned and bolted back toward the trail, crashing through the brush like panicked deer. I didn't look back, but I could hear it. Fast. Too fast. Branches snapping, something wet and heavy moving through the trees. Hank was behind me, panting hard. It's gaining. Don't stop, I yelled, dodging low branches and leaping over roots. My boots slipped on wet moss, but I didn't fall. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. The growl came again. Closer. More angry now. We weren't prey anymore. We were intruders. I saw a break in the trees. The edge of the forest. The dirt road we'd crossed earlier. Almost there. I shouted. Then Hank tripped. I spun around in time to see him stumble, his leg tangled in a root. The creature emerged behind him, moving like smoke given flesh. It was fast, far too fast. But then something happened that I still can't explain. It stopped, right at the edge of the clearing. It didn't reach for Hank, didn't lunge or roar. It just stood there, watching. Those glowing eyes locked on us, unblinking. And then, slowly, it stepped back, melted into the trees, vanished. Hank scrambled to his feet. Go, he yelled. We didn't stop until we hit the road and found the old pickup truck parked just ahead. The man behind the wheel didn't say a word at first. We burst from the tree line like madmen, soaked in sweat and panic, limbs scratched to hell, and with no shame left between us. Hank was gasping for breath, and I was practically dragging my legs. The old pickup truck was parked on the edge of the dirt road, loaded with split logs, and the man beside it, lean, grizzled, gray beard down to his collar, just stood there, arms crossed, as if he'd been waiting. You boys running from it? He finally asked, voice low and flat. Neither of us answered. I just nodded. He jerked a thumb toward the truck bed. Get in. We didn't hesitate. I threw myself into the back, landing between two piles of firewood, Hank right behind me. The man climbed into the cab, started the engine, and we pulled away down that dirt road, the trees swallowing up the well and that thing behind us. Only once the forest was a fading blur in the mirrors did Hank finally speak. What the hell was that? The old man didn't look back. You don't want to know. We rode the next 20 minutes in silence, save for the growl of the engine and the sound of my heart still hammering in my ears. I kept checking the trees. I didn't trust it not to follow. Hank was pale, still clutching the handle on the side of the bed like the ride might throw him back into the woods. Eventually, we pulled into a small town. Not even a name sign. Just a gas station, a diner, and a general store that looked like it hadn't been open since the 80s. The man parked outside the diner and finally turned to look at us. You get out now, he said. But if you're smart, you don't talk about what you saw. Folks around here, they don't take kindly to stories like that. I hopped out first, my legs still shaking. Hank followed. We didn't even get a chance to say thank you. The man tipped his hat, put the truck in gear, and drove off without another word, the red taillights disappearing into the dust. Inside the diner, it felt like stepping into another time. Pale yellow walls, flickering fluorescent lights, and a waitress who looked like she'd worked there since Nixon was in office. We sat down in the corner booth. We were a mess, muddy, scraped, wild-eyed. But she didn't say a thing, just poured 2 cups of coffee and slid them in front of us. Y'all come from up the ridge? She asked, not looking up from her order pad. We didn't answer. She finally met our eyes. You didn't sleep there, did you? I swallowed hard. We saw something. She stared at us for a long time. Then she leaned in, voice quiet and careful. If you're lucky, it didn't follow. Behind the counter, a man coughed. Loud. The waitress straightened up, backed away. Eat your food, boys. Leave town by nightfall. We didn't argue. After scarfing down 2 plates of greasy eggs and toast, we walked over to the sheriff's station. Small place, single story, wood paneled, with a sign that looked like it had weathered 1,000 storms. Sheriff Thompson met us in the lobby. Tall, old, with eyes that didn't blink enough. You the fellas from the woods? He asked. I nodded. We were camped near a cabin up by the ridge. Something attacked our RV. There's claw marks. We saw something. The sheriff scratched his chin, then leaned back on the edge of his desk. And the RV? Still up there, Hank said. Engine wouldn't start. I'll send someone to check, Thompson said, already sounding bored. You don't seem surprised, I said. He looked at me, real slow. I've lived here all my life. Heard stories since I was a boy. Shadows in the trees. People who walk in and don't walk back out. Thing is, he stood up and opened the front door. We like our quiet. So if you're smart, you'll forget all about it. Go home. Get on with your life. We didn't press it. What could we say that would change his mind? We checked into the town's only motel that night. Peeling wallpaper, musty sheets, and a broken vending machine in the hallway. But after what we'd seen, it felt like a luxury hotel. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing's face. The hollow eyes, the long teeth, the silent gaze as it stood there, watching. It hadn't chased us. It could have. It didn't. That was what kept me awake. Not the fear of being hunted. The fear of being chosen. I never really went back to being the same man after that night. People talk about life-changing experiences like weddings, births, or tragedies. Mine came in the form of glowing eyes in the woods and a silence so deep it felt like the forest had stopped breathing. When Hank and I made it back home, our families were relieved, sure, but they didn't understand. How could they? What do you say? Hey, honey, the RV trip went great. Except for the ancient thing that watched us sleep and almost tore through steel to get to us. You don't. So we didn't. We kept it between us for a while. Hank, being Hank, tried to brush it off. Said it was probably a bear with mange. That maybe the whole thing had gotten blown out of proportion in our heads. But I knew better. He did too, even if he wouldn't admit it. The way his hands shook when he lit a cigarette, or how he stopped going into the woods at all, told me everything I needed to know. I, on the other hand, couldn't let it go. I tried at first, really tried. I kept busy around the house, started volunteering at the local food bank, even signed up for one of those community woodworking classes. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that clearing. That thing. So I started digging. I scoured the internet, read every local legend and backwoods tale I could find. I even tracked down a couple of old newspaper clippings from the 60s and 70s. Missing hikers, unsolved disappearances near the Black Hills. No one ever came out and said what I was thinking, but the signs were there. People went into those woods and didn't come back. Those who did, well, they didn't talk about it. I posted anonymously in forums, trying to find anyone who'd seen what I saw. Most of what came back was garbage, paranormal fanboys and attention seekers, but a few messages stood out. One was from a guy in Wyoming who described the exact same creature. Tall, hunched, eyes that seemed to glow without light, and a smell that made your stomach turn. Another message came from a woman in Montana who claimed her brother vanished during a solo hike, and she found his tent slashed but nothing taken. Only deep claw marks in the dirt, and a photo half-burned showing something tall in the trees behind him. Those stories chilled me, but they also confirmed I wasn't crazy. And the more I read, the more one truth settled into my bones. It didn't stay in one place. Whatever that thing was, it moved. Followed something. Maybe scent. Maybe memory. Maybe just hunger. I started noticing small things around my home. Scratches near the back gate. Bent fence posts. My trash can torn apart, but nothing taken. Once, I found a patch of grass flattened in my backyard, way too large to be from any animal that belonged in Pennsylvania. Another time, my motion light flicked on at 3:11 a.m., and the camera caught nothing. Just blackness. As if the lens itself had blinked. Then the dreams began. They weren't nightmares, not at first. Just flashes. Me standing in the woods. The cabin in the distance. The sound of something moving just out of frame. But the dreams got worse. Louder. More vivid. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, certain I'd heard that rumbling growl again. Eventually, I stopped sleeping much at all. I lost touch with Hank. Not out of anger, just drift. I think it hurt him to remember. To have someone around who knew. Last I heard, he moved down to Arizona. Desert living. Not many trees. Can't say I blame him. And me? I stayed. I rigged my house with cameras. Got motion sensors, floodlights, a reinforced door. Most folks in the neighborhood think I'm some paranoid old crank. I let them. If they'd seen what I had, they'd sleep with a shotgun too. I still check the forums now and then. Still follow the whispers. And once a year, same week, same moon phase, I take a long drive out west. Not back to the Black Hills. Never again. But nearby. Places where the woods grow thick and the light doesn't reach the floor. I don't go far in. I just sit, listen, and sometimes, when the wind's just right, I hear it again. That low growl, like a voice buried deep in the bones of the earth, calling, reminding me that it never really stopped watching. I don't know how long I have left, but I've left behind journals, recordings, photos. If you're reading this, it means something's still out there. And maybe it's watching you now. So if you ever find yourself driving through South Dakota and you see a trail that doesn't show up on any map, keep driving. And whatever you do, if you hear a knock at your RV door in the middle of the night, don't answer. The idea started over coffee. It had been nearly a decade since Donald Thomas had last seen his old friend Rex Holloway. Life just had a way of pulling folks apart. But after Rex called one Sunday morning out of the blue and said, "Dawn, I miss the mountains," it didn't take much convincing. They were both retired now, two old dogs with too many stories and too much time. A few days later, Don had gassed up the RV, packed up the cooler, and thrown his weathered fishing gear in the back. The destination? A remote stretch of the Rocky Mountains, near Rocky Ridge, a place Rex swore was the last real wilderness in Colorado. A spot he'd marked on a paper map years ago, back when the world still felt big and full of mystery. Just you, me, the pines, and no cell service, Rex had grinned. It sounded perfect. They set out early, leaving the sprawl of Denver behind, watching the city melt into pine and granite. The winding two-lane roads were framed with yellowing aspens and frost-kissed evergreens. It was early October, just cold enough to see your breath in the morning, but still warm enough during the day for short sleeves and long stories. They reached the campsite by late afternoon, a wide, flat clearing about 40 miles from the nearest town. It sat beside a creek that babbled like it had something to say. Towering pines ringed the clearing, their tops lost in the mountain mist. The air was different here, cleaner, quieter. Almost too quiet. The first day was bliss. They grilled burgers over the fire, knocked back a few beers, and laughed about everything from ex-wives to the time Rex nearly drowned trying to impress a girl at Flathead Lake in '78. Don hadn't laughed like that in years, not since his kids moved across the country and the house started to echo. Night fell slow and heavy. Rex brought out an old portable radio, but all they got was static. Don didn't mind. The fire popped and cracked. The stars blinked to life in a sky so big it made you feel small. And for a moment, it felt like they were boys again, full of hope and bad ideas. Don took the back bunk in the RV while Rex snored like a bear on the fold-out. But around 2 a.m., Don woke up cold. The heater had cut off, but that wasn't what got him up. It was something else. A feeling. Like something was watching the RV. Rex was still snoring. Don crept to the window and pulled the curtain just an inch. What he saw made his stomach twist, a shape moving through the trees just beyond the fire pit. Big. Slouched. Wrong. It wasn't a bear. It was standing upright, tall enough that its head brushed the lowest branches. And it twitched as it moved, like a puppet with broken strings. Then it was gone. Just shadows and silence. Don didn't sleep after that. The next morning, he told Rex about it. Rex shrugged it off, said it was probably a moose or a trick of the firelight. But Don knew what he saw. He just didn't know what it was. Not yet. The second day started cold. A biting wind moved through the pines, and the sky was gunmetal gray, the kind of morning that made your coffee taste better and your bones ache a little louder. Don tried to shake off the unease from the night before. Maybe Rex was right. Maybe it was a moose or a trick of the light. But deep down, he didn't believe that. Still, he didn't say much. He poured coffee into a steel mug and sat by the fire pit while Rex fried up some bacon on the old camp stove. The smell filled the air, made things feel normal again. They joked about getting too old for sleeping on stiff cushions and laughed about how long it took Rex to roll out of bed. By mid-morning, they decided to go hiking up a nearby ridge. Nothing serious, just a light trail that looped around and offered a decent view of the creek and the valley beyond. Don brought his old Nikon to snap some shots of the changing leaves, and Rex insisted on bringing a small cooler with 2 beers and a sleeve of jerky. You never know when the wild calls, he joked, tapping his belly. The trailhead wasn't marked, just a narrow break between the trees that Rex remembered from years ago. The hike was steep in places, with roots twisting across the ground like veins. The air grew quieter as they climbed. Even the wind seemed hesitant to push too hard through this part of the forest. About an hour in, they reached a bluff overlooking the campsite. You could see the RV from up there, a white speck among a sea of green. The creek sparkled in the sun, and the tree line curved around them like a cradle. It was beautiful, peaceful. Then something shifted. Don felt it first. That same feeling he'd had the night before. Like a set of eyes pinned at his back. The hairs on his arms stood up, and a chill slipped down his spine even though the sun was warm on his neck. He scanned the trees but saw nothing. "Something's off," he muttered. Rex was mid-swig with his beer. "What?" "Just listen." They went quiet. And it was too quiet. No birds. No rustling. No wind. Just silence. Heavy and complete, like someone had sucked the sound out of the world. Then came the crack. A sharp snap, like a branch being stepped on, maybe 20 yards below them, where the slope dipped into darker woods. Don raised his camera, pointing it toward the sound, but his hands were trembling too much to focus the lens. "Probably a deer," Rex said, but his voice had dropped. He didn't believe that either. Then they saw it. Just for a second, between two trees. A figure. Tall. Hunched. Covered in what looked like patchy, matted fur. It stood completely still, almost blending into the trunks around it. But its head turned, slowly, unnaturally, and two eyes caught the sunlight, not reflecting it, but glowing. Pale yellow, like backlit fog. Then it was gone. Melted into the shadows like it had never been there. "Jesus," Don breathed. "Did you see?" "I saw it," Rex whispered. "That wasn't a deer." They didn't speak again for a long time. They hiked back to camp in a hurry, both constantly glancing over their shoulders. Every snapped twig or swaying branch felt like it meant something. They were being watched, they knew it. By the time they reached the RV, the sun had dropped low. The temperature fell with it. They built the fire higher that night, way higher. Neither of them wanted to admit they were scared, but the way Rex kept his hunting knife within arm's reach and Don kept the camera looped around his wrist said it all. They ate in silence. No beer. No music. Just the fire, the stars, and the kind of tension that crawls under your skin and stays there. Then came the second sign. Don had just stepped away from the fire to grab more wood when he froze. A single footprint in the dirt, just a few feet from the edge of the light. It was huge, at least 14 inches long. Not quite human. Not quite animal. 5 toes, but they were stretched, long and clawed. The heel was deeper than the rest, like whatever made it was heavy. Very heavy. He didn't call Rex over. He didn't have to. Rex saw his face, walked over, and when he looked down, all the color drained from his own. They didn't say anything. They just went into the RV, locked the door, and pulled the curtains tight. Outside, the woods remained quiet. Too quiet. Like something was holding its breath. Underscore 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 underscore. That third night in the Rockies was the turning point. The air had that strange stillness to it again, like the forest had taken a deep breath and refused to let it out. Rex had just fallen asleep, snoring like a chainsaw from the other end of the RV, and I was trying to wind down with a crossword and a lukewarm cup of instant coffee. I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. You know that prickling sensation, like your skin knows something before your brain catches up? It started with a faint scrape. Not loud, but deliberate. Like claws, or maybe nails, dragging slowly along the outer wall of the RV. I froze. Set the coffee down so slow it didn't even ripple. At first, I thought maybe it was a tree branch in the wind, but there was no wind. I checked the time, 12:43 a.m. I slid off the bench seat, careful not to make noise, and crept to the small side window. Nothing. Just darkness and the faint orange glow of our dying fire outside. Then a sharp knock, no, a rap on the side of the RV. 3 times. I backed away from the window like a kid who just saw a ghost. My pulse was pounding in my ears. I grabbed the flashlight and the old hunting knife I always kept under the sink, not that a 3-inch blade was going to do much if someone, or something, decided to come through the door. "Rex," I whispered, shaking his shoulder. "Wake up. Something's outside." He groaned and rolled over, but when he heard the next knock, this one on the rear bumper, his eyes snapped open. No jokes. No sleepy confusion. Just pure alertness. "What the hell is that?" he hissed, sitting up. "I don't know," I said. "But it's circling." We turned off every light. Sat in the dark, breathing as quietly as we could. The next sound was worse. It was a slow, dragging noise across the roof, like it was crawling. The RV shook lightly, just enough to let us know we weren't imagining it. Something was up there. We didn't dare look out. We just listened. It moved from one end of the RV to the other, the metal creaking under its weight. Then came the scratching at the back window. Not a frantic scratch, not like an animal. This was slow, calculated, like it was testing us, seeing if we'd react. When I finally got the nerve to peek through a tiny slit in the curtain, I wished I hadn't. It was standing just beyond the glow of the fire, tall, misshapen, hunched like its spine was too long for its body. Arms that hung too low. No visible face, just two dim orbs where eyes should have been. And even from inside, through the glass, I felt those eyes lock onto mine. I dropped the curtain. My heart was slamming against my ribs. "It's out there," I whispered. The RV began to rock. Not hard, just enough to let us know. It could flip us if it wanted to. We held our breath as it circled, knocked again, scratched, then silence. For maybe 15, 20 minutes. Long enough for your mind to start playing tricks on you. Rex and I barely moved. We stayed up the rest of the night, clutching that dull knife and a tire iron, waiting for something to crash through the window. But it didn't. When dawn finally came, we stumbled outside, exhausted. The fire had gone out. The air was cold and brittle. We circled the RV, and what we found chilled us more than anything. There were claw marks etched into the metal siding. Deep ones. The kind no raccoon or black bear could make. There were prints too. Footprints, kind of, but not quite human. Bigger, wider, with long toes that ended in pointed gouges. We packed up in a daze. Neither of us said much. But we both knew. That thing, it wasn't done. Not even close. We didn't even eat breakfast that morning. Just threw what we could into plastic tubs, slammed the RV door, and got the hell out of that clearing. My hands were shaking so bad, I nearly dropped the keys twice before I got them into the ignition. The moment the engine rumbled to life, I slammed my foot on the gas, tearing down the dirt trail like something was already chasing us. The road was bumpy and narrow, a mess of roots and rock, but I didn't care if we broke a damn axle. We just had to get out. Rex didn't speak at first. He just kept glancing back through the rear window like he was expecting that thing to come sprinting after us on all fours. It didn't. Not then, anyway. It took us the better part of an hour to get to the nearest paved road, and by the time we rolled into the next small town, both of us looked like we'd seen war. Pale, wide-eyed, reeking of sweat and smoke. We pulled into a gas station first, just to get our bearings. The clerk barely glanced at us when we walked in, but an old man sitting at a tiny round table near the window, sipping coffee out of a paper cup, locked onto us the moment we stepped through the door. "You boys look like hell," he said, setting his cup down slowly. Rex tried to play it off with a chuckle, but it came out all wrong, dry, cracked, like a man who hadn't laughed in years. I didn't say anything, just stared at the scratch marks on my own forearms, the ones I'd earned scrambling through brambles in the dark. The old man tilted his head. "You were up in Rocky Ridge, weren't you? That got our attention." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, camping." My voice sounded far away, like it didn't belong to me. The man looked around the store, then motioned us over with a crook of his finger. We followed, sitting down at his table like schoolboys called to the principal's office. He leaned in close. "You saw it, didn't you?" Rex's eyes narrowed. "Saw what?" The man's expression didn't change. "The snatcher. I swear the air in that store got 10 degrees colder." "I've lived in this town 40 years, the man said, voice low and steady. "Used to be a ranger, back when folks respected the woods. Every couple years, someone goes missing up there. Hunters, hikers, campers. Sometimes they're found. What's left of them anyway. Most times they ain't." We said nothing. "I've seen the prints myself," he continued. "Seen the claw marks. Even heard it once, dragging its limbs through the trees in the middle of the night. Big as a moose. Quiet as a shadow." He paused, taking a long sip from his cup. "We call it the snatcher because it doesn't just kill. It waits, watches, picks its moment. And when it comes for you, no one hears you scream." I felt something cold settle in my chest, like a rock I'd swallowed whole. "Why doesn't anyone warn people?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Some do," the man said, his eyes dark. "But most don't want to believe. And the ones who do believe, they stop talking." He looked straight at me then, not blinking. "You boys are lucky. Next time, you might not be." We left that gas station in silence, not even filling up the tank. And I never forgot that man's face. The way his eyes followed us to the door. Like he knew. Like he'd seen it too. It was 3 months later when I got the call. I still remember exactly where I was, standing in line at the grocery store, holding a six-pack of beer and some frozen dinner I didn't even want. My phone buzzed, and I almost let it go to voicemail. I wish I had. Donald. It was Rex's sister, Rachel. Her voice was tight, barely holding back something I didn't want to hear. Yeah. Hey, Rachel, I said, shifting the phone to my other ear. Everything okay? She hesitated. Rex. Rex didn't come back from a trip. My stomach dropped. He said he just wanted a few days away. Thought maybe go up into the mountains again. You know, blow off steam. He didn't say much else. But that was 5 days ago. I nearly dropped the phone. 5 days. She went on to explain the police had already found his truck, abandoned at a trailhead in Rocky Ridge. His pack was gone. No signs of struggle. No note. No clue where he went. I didn't even hang up before I was already throwing things into a duffel bag. That night, I drove back to Colorado. It was like sleepwalking, only worse, fully aware of what I was walking into, yet helpless to stop myself. I stopped by the sheriff's office first, pretending to be family so they'd talk to me. The deputy didn't say much. They were treating it as a missing hiker case, which is lawman code for we've got nothing and we won't find him. But he let me see where the truck had been parked. When I got up there the next morning, the area had already been mostly cleared. But something caught my eye near the edge of the woods, an indentation in the dirt. Faint, but still there. Long, thin. Almost human. Almost. I didn't say anything. Just took a picture with my phone and kept walking. My thoughts felt like a looping reel of that night months ago. The way we'd huddled inside the RV. The way the metal groaned under the pressure of claws. The way Rex had looked out the window and whispered, "What the hell is that?" And now he was gone. I spent the next several days combing through local reports, hiking the edges of the trails near where his truck was found, and sleeping in cheap motels. I couldn't go deep in, not alone. Not without backup. But the more time I spent there, the more convinced I became that what we'd seen that night hadn't forgotten us. Or maybe it had only wanted one of us all along. One night, after too many beers and too few hours of sleep, I sat on the motel bed and opened up a blank notepad on my laptop. And I started typing. Everything. From the first weird sound in the woods, to the old man's warning at the diner, to the scratches on the RV. I wrote it like a confession. Like if I didn't get it all down, it would rot inside me. By sunrise, I had 20 pages. By noon, I started cross-referencing them with every disappearance in Rocky Ridge over the past 30 years. And let me tell you, there were patterns. Not just random vanishings. Most were people like us, experienced outdoorsmen. People who knew how to handle themselves in the woods. And they all went missing within a few square miles. It wasn't just a coincidence. And I knew. Deep down, I knew Rex had joined that list. Not because he got lost, but because something took him. I didn't go back to work after Rex disappeared. At first, I told myself I was taking time off to help search, to coordinate with authorities, to support his family. But the truth was simpler. I couldn't function. Couldn't sit in front of a computer, couldn't have small talk with coworkers about football scores or weather forecasts. My head was back in the mountains. Back where I'd left my best friend to vanish into the trees. I started staying up late, combing online forums for stories like ours, creature sightings, unexplained disappearances, shadow people of the Rockies. 90% was garbage. People chasing likes or making up stories for fun. But the other 10% felt real. There were whispers of something ancient. A presence in the trees. Stories from hunters, hikers, park rangers. Most were anonymous. Most never stuck around to talk. But when I messaged one guy from a backpacking subreddit who had posted about a thing with glowing eyes watching our fire from the ridge, he answered. And he knew. He described the shape, the gait, the way it didn't make noise until it wanted to. The feeling of being stalked, like a deer too dumb to know it's already been picked. That broke something in me. Or maybe it snapped me into focus. I went full tilt. I bought gear, motion sensor cameras, night vision goggles, a rugged GPS tracker, a drone. I started mapping out every reported sighting, every missing person case in a 30-mile radius of Rocky Ridge. I pinned it all on the wall of my garage, red string and all, like some conspiracy theorist from a Netflix docuseries. And maybe I was. But the connections were real. People disappeared in clusters. Always near water. Always in the colder months. Always without a trace. One case haunted me more than the others. A teenage boy named Caleb Dorsey who vanished in 1998 on a scout trip. I tracked down the troop leader. He didn't want to talk at first, but after a few beers at a local dive bar, he started to crack. Said the night before Caleb vanished, the kid had talked about seeing someone, or something, outside his tent. Said it had a long back and didn't walk right. He called it the Deer Man, but the troop leader thought it was just nerves or a prank. Next morning, Caleb was gone. The kid had left his shoes behind. His shoes. No body ever found. That's what the snatcher does. It doesn't leave remains. It takes. Clean. Silent. Like a ghost with claws. I became obsessed. My whole life rearranged around one central axis. Find out what happened to Rex. And if I couldn't bring him back, I'd damn well make sure the world knew what took him. But nobody wanted to listen. The cops stopped returning my calls. His family stopped inviting me to the vigils. "You're making it worse," Rachel had said on the phone, voice cracking. "You're treating this like some ghost story when we're just trying to grieve." But that's the thing. You can't grieve something like this when there are no bones to bury. So I kept going. I planted cameras near the trailheads where the disappearances happened. Left recorders out overnight. Spent weekends hiking alone into the backcountry with nothing but my gear and my growing paranoia. I never stayed more than one night. I never turned my back to the tree line. And I never slept easy. Sometimes I'd wake up just before dawn to the feeling that something had been standing just outside the tent. The smell of wet bark and something iron. Like rust. Like blood. I checked the cameras every time I came back. And once, just once, I caught it. Not clearly. Not enough to convince anyone but me. But there was a frame. A shadow. Shoulders too high. Arms too long. Head tilted at an angle no human could manage. And eyes. Glowing like hot coals in the dark. I printed it. Taped it to the wall above the map. Right over Rex's name. He wasn't coming back. But I wasn't stopping either. Not until I knew where it took him. Not until I stood in that place. Not until I looked into those eyes again, and this time, didn't flinch. It's been 16 years since Rex vanished in the Rockies. 16 winters. 16 birthdays. 16 Christmases I've sat alone, wondering where he went, if he knew it was coming, if he had a chance to run. I've walked the same trails he once did, eaten from the same cans, breathed in the same freezing night air. But I never found him, and I never saw it again. Not clearly, not like that night. Until now. A few weeks ago, I got a letter. No return address. Just a single line typed on paper yellowed from damp and time. It comes back every 13 years. Same place. Same season. You know where. That was all. But I did know. The numbers matched up. Rex went missing in 2007. Another man, Jackie Hall, disappeared in 1994, almost to the day. The last known case before that. A woman named Marla Jennings in 1981. It wasn't random. It was a pattern. And that meant the next window was now. So I packed the gear. Every camera, every light, every sensor. Printed copies of every map. Rewatched every grainy frame of footage until my eyes stung. And then I did something I hadn't done in over a decade. I took the RV out of storage. It was rusted through in places, and the decals were faded beyond recognition. But it still started. Still smelled the same inside, like dust, old thermos coffee, and campfire smoke. It was the same one Rex and I had taken out the last time. This time, I was going alone. I didn't tell anyone. Not my niece. Not the guy who delivers my meds. I just drove west, through Colorado towns that felt smaller than they used to. Through long pine corridors lined with silence and snow. Back to Rocky Ridge. I parked in the same clearing we used years ago, near the stream with the broken bridge and the old birch stump Rex used to sit on when he tied his boots. I cleared brush, set up the perimeter, mounted trail cams in the trees. And then I waited. That first night, the cold was sharp and clear. I lit a fire, sat in my old chair, and stared out past the tree line. I didn't bring books. I didn't bring distractions. Just silence and time. Like bait. And then, on the second night, right around 2 a.m., I heard it. Scraping. Not from the brush. Not from the wind. From the RV. It came in threes. Slow. Deliberate. Just like all the stories said. I turned the cameras on manually. Hit record on the audio logs. And then I stepped outside with nothing but a flashlight and a flare gun. The clearing looked empty at first. But the shadows moved wrong. They breathed. And then I saw it. Same as before, 7 feet tall, hunched at the shoulders, legs bending backward like a spider's. The skin, if it was skin, looked mottled and dark, like bark soaked in oil. Its eyes weren't glowing this time. They were reflecting mine. It took a step closer, silent despite its weight. I raised the flare gun. It paused. We stared at each other for what felt like minutes. And then it did something I never expected. It tilted its head and placed one long finger to where its lips should have been. Shoo! Then it backed away into the dark. Not running. Not afraid. Just retreating. As if it had seen what it needed. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't shut my eyes until the sun poured down between the pines and made me sure I was still alive. I checked the cameras. Some had footage. One showed the faintest shimmer of movement, like heat off pavement. Another caught a still of those eyes, just a second before they vanished into shadow. It was enough. I drove back that afternoon, the snow melting behind me. Now I sit here, back in town, the photos spread across my desk. The emails are already piling up from researchers who used to laugh at me. They want copies. They want interviews. But I haven't answered them yet. Because I know one thing they don't. It wasn't over. That thing, whatever it is, it's curious. It learns. And now it knows my face. So I wait. Each night, I check the cameras around my house. I sleep with the lights on. Sometimes I dream I'm back in that clearing, and Rex is sitting at the fire, smiling at me like none of it ever happened. Sometimes I hear him whisper from the trees. But it's not him. It's it. Watching. Waiting. And one day it might knock again.